Third Day Introduction of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Third Day Introduction. Endeth here the second day of the Decameron, beginneth the third, in which under the rule of Neophile, discourse is had of the fortune of such as have painfully acquired some much coveted thing, or having lost, have recovered it. The dawn of Sunday was already changing from vermilion to orange, as the sun hasted to the horizon, when the Queen rose and roused all the company. The Seneschal had early sent forward to their next place of sojourn ample store of things meet with folk to make all things ready, and now seeing the Queen on the road, and the decampment as it were begun, he hastily collected the equipment of the baggage train, and set off therewith, attended by the rest of the servants, in rear of the ladies and gentlemen. So to the chant of, perhaps, a score of nightingales and other birds, the Queen, her ladies, and the three young men, trooping beside or after her, paced leisurely westward by a path little frequented and overgrown with herbage and flowers, which, as they caught the sunlight, began one and all to unfold their petals. So fared she on with their train, while the kirk and the jest and the laugh passed from mouth to mouth, nor had they completed more than 2,000 paces, when, well before half tierce, they arrived at a palace, most fair and sumptuous, which stood out somewhat from the plain, being situate upon a low eminence. On entering, they first traversed its great halls and dainty chambers, furnished throughout with all brave and meet appointments, and finding all most commendable, they reputed its lord a Magnifico. Then descending, they surveyed its spacious and cheerful court, its vaults of excellent wines and copious springs of most cool water, and found it still more commendable. After which, being fain of rest, they sat them down in a gallery which commanded the court, and was close embosked with leafage and such flowers as the season afforded, and thither the discreet Seneschal brought comfits and wines, most choice and excellent, wherewith they were refreshed. Whereupon they hied them to a walled garden adjoining the palace, which, the gate being opened, they entered, and wonder-struck by the beauty of the whole, passed on to examine more attentively the several parts. It was bordered and traversed in many parts by alleys, each very wide and straight as an arrow, and roofed in with trellis of vines, which gave good promise of bearing clusters that year, and being all in flower, dispersed such fragrance throughout the garden, as blended with that exhaled by many another plant that grew therein, made the garden seem redolent for all the spices that ever grew in the East. The sides of the alleys were all, as it were, walled in with roses, white and red and jasmine, insomuch that there was no part of the garden but one might walk there not merely in the morning, but at high noon in grateful shade and fragrance, completely screened from the sun. As for the plants that were in the garden, it were long to enumerate them, to specify their sorts, to describe the order of their arrangement. Enough in brief that there was abundance of every rarer species that our climate allows. In the middle of the garden, a thing no less but much more to be commended than aught else, was a lawn of the finest turf, and so green that it seemed almost black, pranked with flowers of perhaps 1,000 sorts, and girt about with the richest living verdure of orange trees and cedars, which shewed not only flowers but fruits, both new and old, and were no less grateful to the smell by their fragrance than to the eye by their shade. In the middle of the lawn was a basin of whitest marble, graven with marvellous art, in the centre whereof, whether the spring were natural or artificial I know not, rose a column supporting a figure, which sent forth a jet of water of such volume and to such an altitude, that it fell, not without a delicious splash, into the basin in quantity amply sufficient to turn a mill wheel. The overflow was carried away from the lawn by a hidden conduit, and then, re-emerging, was distributed through tiny channels, very fair and cunningly contrived, in such sort as to flow round the entire lawn, and by similar derivative channels to penetrate almost every part of the fair garden, until, reuniting at a certain point, it issued thence, and clear as crystal slid down towards the plain, turning by the way 2 mill wheels with extreme velocity, to the no small profit of the lord. The aspect of this garden, its fair order, the plants and the fountain of the rivulets that followed from it, so charmed the ladies and the 3 young men, that with one accord they affirmed that they knew not how it could receive any accession of beauty, or what other form could be given to paradise, if it were to be planted on earth. So excellently well pleased, they roved about it, plucking sprays from the trees and weaving them into the fairest of garlands, while songsters of, perhaps, a score of different sorts warbled as if in mutual emulation, when suddenly a sight as fair and delightsome as novel, which, engrossed by the other beauties of the place, they had hitherto overlooked, met their eyes. For the garden, they now saw, was peopled with a host of living creatures, fair and of perhaps 100 sorts, and they pointed out to one another how here emerged a coney, or there scampered a hare, or couched a goat, or grazed a fawn, or many another harmless, all but domesticated, creature roved carelessly, seeking his pleasure at his own sweet will, all which served immensely to reinforce their already abundant delight. At length, however, they had enough of wandering about the garden and observing this thing and that, wherefore they repaired to the beautiful fountain, around which were ranged the tables, and there, after they had sung half a dozen songs and trod some measures, they sat them down, at the Queen's command, to breakfast, which was served with all celerity and in fair and orderly manner, the viands being both good and delicate, whereby their spirits rose, and up they got, and betook themselves again to music and song and dance, and so sped the hours, until, as the heat increased, the Queen deemed it time that whoso was so minded should go to sleep. Some there were that did so, others were too charmed by the beauty of the place to think of leaving it, but tarried there, and while the rest slept, amused themselves with reading romances or playing at chess or dice. However, after noon, there was a general levee, and, with faces laved and refreshed with cold water, they gathered by the Queen's command upon the lawn, and having sat them down in their wonted order by the fountain, waited for the story-telling to begin upon the theme assigned by the Queen. With this duty the Queen first charged Philostrato, who began on this wise. End of introduction of the third day.
Day 3, the first story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the first story. Maceto de Lamporecchio feigns to be dumb, and obtains a gardener's place at a convent of women, who with one accord make haste to lie with him. Fairest ladies, not a few there are, both men and women, who are so foolish as blindly believe that, so soon as a young woman has been veiled in white and cowled in black, she ceases to be a woman, and is no more subject to the cravings proper to her sex, than if, in assuming the garb and profession of a nun, she had put on the nature of a stone. And if, perchance, they hear of aught that is counter to this their faith, they are no less vehement in their censure than if some most heinous and unnatural crime had been committed, neither bethinking of themselves, whom unrestricted liberty avails not to satisfy, nor making due allowance for the prepotent forces of idleness and solitude. And likewise not a few there are that blindly believe that, what with the hoe and the spade, and coarse fare and hardship, the carnal propensities are utterly eradicated from the tillers of the soil, and therewith all nimbleness of wit and understanding. But how gross is the error of such as suppose, I, on whom the queen has laid her commands, am minded, without deviating from the theme prescribed by her, to make manifest to you a little story. In this very countryside of ours there was, and yet is, a convent of women of great repute for sanctity. Name it I will not, lest I should in some measure diminish its repute, the nuns being at the time of which I speak but 9 in number, including the abbess and all young women. Their very beautiful garden was in the charge of a foolish fellow, who, not being content with his wage, squared accounts with their steward, and hied him back to Lamporecchio, whence he came. Among others who welcomed him home was a young husbandman, Maceto by name, a stout and hearty fellow, and handsome for a contadino, who asked him where he had been so long. Nuto, as our good friend was called, told him. Maceto then asked how he had been employed at the convent, and Nuto answered, I kept their large and beautiful garden in good trim, and besides I sometimes went to the wood to fetch the faggots. I drew water, and did some other trifling services. But they are the one and all possessed of the devil, for 'tis impossible to do anything to their mind, indeed, when I would be at work in the kitchen garden. Put this here, one would say, put that here, another would say, and a third would snatch the hoe from my hand, and say, that is not as it should be, and they would worry me until I would give up working and go out of the garden, so that, with this thing and that, I was minded to stay there no more, and so I am come hither. The steward asked me before I left to send him any one, whom on my return I might find fit for the work, and I promised, but God bless his loins, I shall be at no pains to find out, and send him any one. As Nuto thus ran on, Maceto was seized by such a desire to be with these nuns that he quite pined, as he gathered from what Nuto said that his desire might be gratified. And as that could not be, if he said nothing to Nuto, he remarked, Ah, 'twas well done of thee to come hither, a man to live with women. He might as well live with so many devils. 6 times out of 7 they know not themselves what they want. There the conversation ended, but Maceto began to cast about how he should proceed to get permission to live with them. He knew that he was quite competent for the services of which Nuto spoke, and had therefore no fear of failing on that score, but he doubted he should not be received, because he was too young and well favoured. So, after much pondering, he fell into the following train of thought. The place is a long way off, and no one there knows me. If I make believe that I am dumb, doubtless I shall be admitted. Whereupon he made his mind up, laid a hatchet across his shoulder, and saying not a word to any of his destination, set forth, intending to present himself at the convent in the character of a destitute man. Arrived there, he had no sooner entered than he chanced to encounter the steward in the courtyard, and making signs to him as dumb folk do, he let him know that of his charity he craved something to eat, and that, if need were, he would split firewood. The steward promptly gave him to eat, and then set before him some logs which Nuto had not been able to split, all of which Maceto, who was very strong, split in a very short time. The steward, having occasion to go to the wood, took him with him, and there set him at work on the lopping; which done, he placed the ass in front of him, and by signs made him understand that he was taking the loggings back to the convent. He did this so well that the steward kept him for some days to do 1 or 2 odd jobs, whereby it so befell that one day the abbess saw him, and asked the steward who he was. Madam, replied the steward, 'tis a poor deaf mute that came here a day or 2 ago, craving alms, so I have treated him kindly, and have let him make himself useful in many ways. If he knew how to do the work of the kitchen garden, and would stay with us, I doubt not we should be well served, for we have need of him, and he is strong, and would be able for whatever he might turn his hand to. Besides which, you have no cause to be apprehensive lest he should be cracking his jokes with your young women. As I trust in God, said the abbess, thou sayest sooth. Find out if he can do the garden work, and if he can, do all thou canst do to keep him with us. Give him a pair of shoes, an old hood, and speak him well. Make much of him, and let him be well fed. All of which the steward promised to do. Maceto, meanwhile, was close at hand, making as if he were sweeping the courtyard, and heard all that passed between the abbess and the steward, whereat he gleefully communed with himself on this wise: "Put me once within there, and you will see that I will do the work of the kitchen garden as it was never done before." So the steward set him to work in the kitchen garden, and finding that he knew his business excellently well, made signs to him to know whether he would stay, and he made answer by signs that he was ready to do whatever the steward wished. The steward then signified that he was engaged, told him to take charge of the kitchen garden, and showed him what he had to do there. Then, having other matters to attend to, he went away, and left him there. Now, as Macedo worked there day by day, the nuns began to tease him, and make him their butt, as it commonly happens that folk serve the dumb, and use bad language to him, the worst they could think of, supposing that he could not understand them. All of which passed scarce heeded by the abbess, who perhaps deemed him as destitute of virility as of speech. Now it so befell that after a hard day's work he was taking a little rest, when two young nuns, who were walking in the garden, approached the spot where he lay, and stopped to look at him while he pretended to be asleep. And so the bolder of the two said to the other, "If I thought thou wouldest keep it the secret, I would tell thee what I have sometimes meditated, and which thou perhaps mightest also find agreeable." The other replied, "Speak thy mind freely, and be sure that I will never tell a soul." Whereupon the bold one began again: "I know not if thou hast ever considered how close we are kept here, and that within these precincts dare never enter any man, unless it be the old steward, or this mute. And I have often heard from ladies that have come hither, that all the other sweets that the world has to offer signify not a jot in comparison of the pleasure that a woman has in connection with a man. Whereof I have more than once been minded to make an experiment with this mute, no other man being available. Nor indeed could any one find any man in the whole world so meet therefore, seeing that he could not blab if he would. Thou seest that he is but a dull clownish lad, whose size has increased out of all proportion to his sense. Wherefore I would fain hear what thou wouldst have to say to it." "Alas," said the other, "what is't thou sayest? Knowest thou not that we have vowed our virginity to God?" "Oh," rejoined the first, "think but how many vows are made to him all day long, and never a one performed. And so for our vow let him find another, or others to perform it." "But," said her companion, "suppose that we conceived, how then?" "Nay, but," protested the first, "thou goest about to imagine evil before it befalls thee. Time enough to think of that when it comes to pass. There will be 1,000 ways to prevent it ever being known, so only we do not publish it ourselves." Thus reassured, the other was now the more eager of the two to test the quality of the male human animal. "Well then," she said, "how shall we go about it?" And was answered, "Thou seest 'tis past none. I make no doubt but all the sisters are asleep, except ourselves. Search we through the kitchen garden to see if there be any there, and if there be none, we have but to take him by the hand and lead him hither to the hut where he takes shelter from the rain. And then one shall mount guard, while the other has him with her inside. He is such a simpleton that he will do just whatever we bid him." No word of this conversation escaped Maceto, who, being disposed to obey, hoped for nothing so much as that one of them should take him by the hand. They meanwhile looked carefully all about them, and satisfied themselves that they were secure from observation. Then she that had broached the subject came close up to Maceto and shook him, whereupon he started to his feet. So she took him by the hand with a blandishing air, to which he replied with some clownish grins, and then she led him into the hut, where he needed no pressing to do what she desired of him; which done, she changed places with the other, as loyal comradeship required, and Maceto, still keeping up the pretence of simplicity, did their pleasure. Wherefore, before they left, each must needs make another essay of the mute's powers of writing. And afterwards, taking the matter over many times, they agreed that it was in truth not less, but even more delightful than they had been given to understand. And so, as they found convenient opportunity, they continued to go and disport themselves with the mute. Now it so chanced that one of their gossips, looking out of the window of her cell, saw what they did, and imparted it to 2 others. The 3 held counsel together whether they should not denounce the offenders to the abbess, but soon changed their mind, and came to an understanding with them. whereby they became partners in Maceto. And in the course of time, by diverse chances, the remaining 3 nuns also entered the partnership. Last of all, the abbess, still witting not of these doings, happened one very hot day, as she walked by herself through the garden, to find Maceto, who now rode so much by night that he could stand very little fatigue by day. Stretched out at full length asleep under the shade of an almond tree, his person quite exposed in the front by reason that the wind had disarranged his clothes. Which the lady observing, and knowing that she was alone, fell a prey to the same appetite to which her nuns had yielded. She aroused Maceto, and took him with her to her chamber, where for some days, though the nuns loudly complained that the gardener no longer came to work in the kitchen garden, she kept him, tasting and retasting the sweetness of that indulgence which she was wont to be the first to censure in others. And when at last she had sent him back from her chamber to his room, she must needs send for him again, and make such exorbitant demands upon him that Maceto, not being able to satisfy so many women, bethought him that his part of mute, should he persist in it, might entail disastrous consequences. So one night, when he was with the abbess, he cut the tongue-string, and thus broke silence. "Madam, I have understood that a cock may very well serve 10 hens, but that 10 men are sorely tasked to satisfy a single woman. And here I am expected to serve 9, a burden quite beyond my power to bear. Nay, by what have I already undergone I am now so much reduced that my strength is quite spent. Wherefore either bid me Godspeed, or find some means to make matters tolerable." Wonderstruck to hear the supposed mute thus speak, the lady exclaimed, "What means this? I took thee to be dumb." "And in sooth, madam, so was I," said Maceto, "not indeed from my birth, but through an illness which took from me the power of speech, which only this very night I have recovered, and so I praise God with all my heart." The lady believed him, and asked him what he meant by saying that he had 9 to serve. Maceto told her how things stood, whereby she perceived that of all her nuns there was not any but was much wiser than she; and lest, if Maceto were sent away, he should give the convent a bad name, she discreetly determined to arrange matters with the nuns in such sort that he might remain there. So, the steward having died within the last few days, she assembled all the nuns, and their and her own past errors being fully avowed, they by common consent, and with Maceto's concurrence, resolved that the neighbours should be given to understand that by their prayers and the merits of their patron saint, Maceto, long mute, had recovered the powers of speech, after which they made him steward, and so ordered matters among themselves that he was able to endure the burden of their service. In the course of which, though he procreated not a few little monastics, yet 'twas all managed so discreetly that no breath of scandal stirred, until after the abbess's death, by which time Maceto was advanced in years, and minded to return home with the wealth he had gotten, which he was suffered to do as soon as he made his desire known. And so Maceto, who had left Lamporecchio with a hatchet on his shoulder, returned thither in his old age, and a father, having by the wisdom with which he employed his youth spared himself the pains and expense of rearing children, and averring that such was the measure that Christ meted out to the man that set horns on his cap. End of Day 3, the first story.
Day 3, the second story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tonight's recording by Miette. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the second story. A groom lies with the wife of King Agilulf, who learns the fact, keeps his own counsel, finds out the groom, and shears him. The shorn shears all his fellows, and so comes safe out of the scrape.
Philostratus' story, which the ladies had received now with blushes, now with laughter, being ended, The queen bade Pampinea to follow suit, which behest Pampinea smilingly obeyed, and thus began:
Some there are whose indiscretion is such that they must needs evince that they are fully cognizant of that which it were best they should not know, and, censuring the covert misdeeds of others, augment beyond measure the disgrace which they would fain diminish. The truth whereof, fair ladies, I mean to shew you in the contrary case, wherein appears the astuteness of one that held, perhaps, an even lower place than would have been Massetto's in the esteem of a doughty king. Agilulf, king of the Lombards, who, like his predecessors, made the city of Pavia in Lombardy the seat of his government, took to wife Theodelinda, the widow of Authori, likewise king of the Lombards, a lady very fair, wise, and virtuous, but who was unfortunate in her lover. For while the Lombards prospered in peace under the wise and firm rule of King Agilulf, it so befell that one of the queen's grooms, a man born to very low estate, but in native worth far above his mean office, and moreover not a whit less tall and goodly of person than the king, became inordinately enamoured of her. And as for all his base condition, he had sense enough to recognize that his love was in the last degree presumptuous, he disclosed it to none. Nay, he did not even venture to tell her the tale by the mute eloquence of his eyes. And albeit he lived without hope that he should ever be able to win her favour, yet he inwardly gloried that he had fixed his affections in so high a place, and being all aflame with passion, he shewed himself zealous beyond any of his comrades to do whatever he thought was likely to please the queen. Whereby it came about that, when the queen had to take horse, she would mount the palfrey that he groomed rather than any other, and when she did so, he deemed himself most highly favoured, and never quitted her stirrup, esteeming himself happy if he might but touch her clothes. But, as 'tis frequently observed that love waxes as hope wanes, so was it with this poor groom, insomuch that the burden of this great hidden passion, alleviated by no hope, was most grievous to bear, and from time to time, not being able to shake it off, he proposed to die, and meditating on the mode, he was minded that it should be of a kind to make it manifest that he died for the love which he had borne and bore to the queen, and also to afford him an opportunity of trying his fortune whether his desire might in whole or in part be gratified. He had no thought of speaking to the queen, nor yet of declaring his love to her by letter, for he knew that would be in vain either to speak or to write. But he resolved to try to devise some means whereby he might lie with the queen, which end might in no other way be compassed than by contriving to get access to her in her bedroom, which could only be by passing himself off as the king, who, as he knew, did not always lie with her. Wherefore, that he might observe the carriage and dress of the king, he passed to her room. He contrived to conceal himself for several nights in a great hall of the king's palace, which separated the king's room from that of the queen, and on one of these nights he saw the king issue from his room, wrapped in a great mantle, with a lighted torch in one hand and a wand in the other, and cross the hall, and, saying nothing, tap the door of the queen's room with the wand once or twice, whereupon the door was at once opened, and the torch taken from his hand. Having observed the king thus go and return, and being bent on doing likewise, he found means to come by a mantle like that which he had seen the king wear, and also a torch and a wand. He then took a warm bath, and, having thoroughly cleansed himself, that the smell of the foul straw might not offend the lady, or discover to her the deceit, he in this guise concealed himself, as he was wont in the great hall. He waited only until all were asleep, and then, deeming the time come to accomplish his purpose, or by his presumption clear away to the death which he coveted, he struck a light with the flint and steel which he had brought with him, and having kindled his torch and wrapped himself close in his mantle, he went to the door of the queen's room, and tapped on it twice with his wand. The door was opened by a very drowsy chambermaid, who took the torch and put it out of sight, whereupon without a word he passed within the curtain, laid aside the mantle, and got into bed, where the queen lay asleep. Then, taking her in his arms and straining her to him with ardour, making as if he were moody, because he knew that when the king was in such a frame he would never hear aught in such wise without word said either on his part or hers, he had more than once carnal cognizance of the queen. Loath indeed was he to leave her, but, fearing lest by too long tarrying his achieved delight might be converted into woe, he rose, resumed the mantle and the light, and leaving the room without a word, returned with all speed to his bed. He was hardly there when the king got up and entered the queen's room, whereat she wondered not a little, but reassured by the gladsome greeting which he gave her, as he got into bed, she said, "My lord, what a surprise is this to-night! 'Twas but now you left me after an unwonted measure of enjoyment, and do you now return so soon? Consider what you do." From these words, the king at once inferred that the queen had been deceived by some one that had counterfeited his person and carriage, but at the same time bethinking himself that, as neither the queen nor any other had detected the cheat, 'twas best to leave her in ignorance, he wisely kept silence, which many a fool would not have done, but would have said, "Nay, 'twas not I that was here. Who was it that was here? How came it to pass? Who came hither?" Whereby in the sequel he might have caused the lady needless chagrin, and given her occasion to desire another such experience as she had had, and so have brought disgrace upon himself by uttering that from which unuttered no shame could have resulted. Wherefore, betraying little, either by his mien or by his words, of the disquietude which he felt, the king replied, "Madam, seem I such to you, that you cannot suppose that I should have been with you once and returned to you immediately afterwards?" "Nay, not so, my lord," returned the lady. but none the less I pray you to look for your health." Then said the king, "And I am minded to take your advice, wherefore, without giving you further trouble, I will leave you." So, angered and incensed beyond measure by the trick which he saw had been played upon him, he resumed his mantle, and quitted the room with the intention of privily detecting the offender, deeming that he must belong to the palace, and that, whoever he may be, he could not have quitted it. So, taking with him a small lantern, which showed only a glimmer of light, he went into the dormitory, which was over the palace stables, and which was of great length, insomuch that well nigh all the men servants slept there in divers beds, and arguing that, by whomsoever that of which the queen spoke was done, his heart and pulse could not after such a strain as yet have ceased to throb. He began cautiously with one of the head grooms, and so went from bed to bed, feeling at the heart of each man to see if it was thumping. All were asleep, save only he that had been with the queen, who, seeing the king come and guessing what he sought to discover, began to be mightily afraid, insomuch that to the agitation which his late exertion had communicated to his heart, terror now added one yet more violent. Nor did he doubt that, should the king perceive it, he would kill him. Diverse alternatives of action thronged his mind, but at last, observing that the king was unarmed, he resolved to make as if he were asleep, and wait to see what the king would do. So, having tried many and found none that he deemed the culprit, the king came at last to the culprit himself, and, marking the thumping of his heart, said to himself, "This is he." But, being minded to afford no clue to his ulterior purpose, he did no more than with the pair of scissors which he had brought with him shear away on one side of the man's head a portion of his locks, which, as was then the fashion, he wore very long, that by this token he might recognize him on the morrow, and having done so, he departed and returned to his room. The groom, who was fully sensible of what the king had done, and being a shrewd fellow, understood very well to what end he was so marked, got up without a moment's delay, and having found a pair of scissors, for as it chanced there were several pairs there belonging to the stables for use in grooming the horses, he went quietly through the dormitory, and in like manner sheared the locks of each of the sleepers just above the ear, which done without disturbing any, he went back to bed. On the morrow, as soon as the king was risen, and before the gates of the palace were opened, he summoned all his men servants to his presence, and, as they stood bareheaded before him, scanned them closely to see whether the one whom he had sheared was there, and observing with surprise that the more part of them were all sheared in the same manner, said to himself, "Of a surety this fellow, whom I go about to detect, evinces for all his base condition a high degree of sense." Then, recognizing that he could not compass his end without causing a bruit, and not being minded to brave so great a dishonour in order to be avenged upon so petty an offender, he was content by a single word of admonition to shew him that his offence had not escaped notice. Wherefore, turning to them all, he said, He that did it, let him do it no more, and get you hence in God's peace. Another would have put them to the strappado, the question, the torture, and thereby have brought to light that which one should rather be sedulous to cloak, and having brought it to light, would, however, complete the retribution which he exacted, having not lessened but vastly augmented his disgrace and sullied the fair fame of his lady. Those who heard the king's parting admonition wondered, and made much question with one another what the king might have meant to convey by it. But 'twas understood by none but him to whom it referred, who was discreet enough never to reveal the secret as long as the king lived, or again to stake his life on such a venture. End of Day 3, the second story. Recording by Miette of Miette's Bedtime Story Podcast.
Day 3, the third story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the third story. Under cloak of confession and a most spotless conscience, a lady, enamored of a young man, induces a booby friar unwittingly to provide a means to the entire gratification of her passion.
When Pampinea had done, and several of the company had commended the hardihood and wariness of the groom, and also the wisdom of the king, the queen, turning to Philomela, bade her follow suit, wherefore, with manner debonair, Philomela thus began.
The story which I shall tell you is of a trick which was actually played by a fair lady upon a booby religious, and which every layman should find the more diverting, that these religious, being, for the most part, great blockheads and men of odd manners and habits, do nevertheless credit themselves with more ability and knowledge in all kinds than fall to the lot of the rest of the world, whereas in truth they are far inferior, and so, not being able like others to provide their own sustenance, are prompted by sheer baseness to fly thither for refuge where they may find provender, like pigs. Which story, sweet my ladies, I shall tell you, not merely that thereby I may continue the sequence in obedience to the queen's behest, but also to the end that I may let you see that even the religious, in whom we, in our boundless credulity, repose exorbitant faith, may be, and sometimes are, made, not to say by men, even by some of us women, the sport of their sly wit. In our city, where wiles do more abound than either love or faith, there dwelt not many years ago a gentlewoman richly endowed, none more so, by nature with physical charms, and also with gracious manners, high spirit, and fine discernment. Her name I know, but will not disclose it, not yet that of any other who figures in this story, because there yet live those who might take offence thereat, though after all it might well be passed off with a laugh. High born and married to an artificer of wooden fabrics, she could not rid her mind of the disdain with which, by reason of his occupation, she regarded her husband, for no man, however wealthy, so he were of low condition, seemed to her worthy to have a gentlewoman to wife, and seeing that for all his wealth he was fit for nothing better than to devise a blend, set up a warp, or higgle about yarn with a spinster, she determined to dispense with his embraces, save so far as she might find it impossible to refuse them, and to find her satisfaction elsewhere with one that seemed to her more meet to afford it than her artificer of woolens. In this frame of mind she became enamored of a man well worthy of her love, and not yet past middle age, insomuch that, if she saw him not in the day, she must needs pass an unquiet night. The gallant, meanwhile, remained fancy-free, for he knew naught of the lady's case, and she, being apprehensive of possible perils to ensue, was far too circumspect to make it known to him either by writing or by word of mouth of any of her female friends. Then she learned that he had much to do with a religious, a simple, clownish fellow, but nevertheless, as being a man of most holy life, reputed by almost everybody a most worthy friar, and decided that she could not find a better intermediary between herself and her lover than this same friar. So, having matured her plan, she hied her at a convenient time to the convent where the friar abode, and sent for him, saying that, if he so pleased, she would be confessed by him. The friar, who saw at a glance that she was a gentlewoman, hardly heard her confession, which done, she said, "My father, I have yet a matter to confide to you, in which I must crave your aid and counsel. Who my kinsfolk and husband are, I wot you know, for I have myself told you. My husband loves me more dearly than his life, and being very wealthy, he can well and does forthwith afford me whatever I desire. Wherefore, as he loves me, even so I love him more dearly than myself, nor was there ever yet wicked woman that deserved the fire so richly as should I, were I guilty. I speak not of acts, but of so much as a single thought of crossing his will or tarnishing his honor. Now a man there is, his name indeed I know not, but he seems to me to be a gentleman, and, if I mistake not, he is much with you, a fine man and tall, his garb done, and very decent, who the bent of my mind's being, belike, quite unknown to him, would seem to have laid siege to me, insomuch that I cannot show myself at door or casement, or quit the house, but forthwith he presents himself before me. Indeed, I find it passing strange that he is not here now. Whereat I am sorely troubled, because, when men so act, unmerited reproach will often thereby be cast upon the honest woman. At times I have been minded to inform my brothers of the matter, but then I have bethought me that men sometimes frame messages in such a way as to evoke untoward answers, whence follow high words, and so they proceed to rash acts. Wherefore, to obviate trouble and scandal, I have kept silence, and by preference have made you my confidant, both because you are the gentleman's friend, and because it befits your office to censure such behaviour not only in friends but in strangers. And so I beseech you for the love of our only Lord God to make him sensible of his fault, and pray him to offend no more in such sort. Other ladies there are in plenty, who may perchance be disposed to welcome such advances, and be flattered to attract his fond and assiduous regard, which to me, who am in no wise inclined to encourage it, is but a most grievous molestation." Having thus spoken, the lady bowed her head, as if she were ready to weep. The holy friar was at no loss to apprehend who it was of whom she spoke. He commended her virtuous frame, firmly believing that what she said was true, and promised to take such action that she should not again suffer the like annoyance, nor, knowing that she was very wealthy, did he omit to extol works of charity and almsgiving, at the same time opening to her his own needs. "I will make my suit to you," said she, "for the love of God, and if your friend should deny what I have told you, tell him roundly that 'twas from me you had it, and that I made complaint to you thereof." So her confession ended and penance imposed, bethinking her of the hints which the friar had dropped touching almsgiving, she slipped into his hand as many coins as it would hold, praying him to say masses for the souls of her dead. She then rose and went home. Not long afterwards the gallant paid one of his wonted visits to the holy friar. They conversed for a while of divers topics, and then the friar took him aside, and very courteously reproved him for so haunting and pursuing the lady with his gaze, as, from what she had given him to understand, he supposed was his wont. The gallant, who had never regarded her with any attention, and very rarely passed her house, was amazed, and was about to clear himself, when the friar closed his mouth, saying, "Now away with this pretence of amazement, and waste no words in denial, for it will not avail thee. I have it not from the neighbours. She herself, bitterly complaining of thy conduct, told it to me. I say not how ill this levity beseems thee, but of her I tell thee so much as this, that if I ever knew this woman averse to such idle philandering, she is so, and therefore, for thy honour's sake, and that she be no more vexed, I pray thee refrain therefrom, and let her be in peace. The gallant, having rather more insight than the holy friar, was not slow to penetrate the lady's fineness. He therefore made as if he were rather shame-stricken, promised to go no further with this matter, and hie him straight from the friar to the lady's house, where she was always posted at a little casement to see if he were passing by. As she saw him come, she saw him so gay and gracious a mien, that he could no longer harbour any doubt that he had put the true construction upon what he had heard from the friar, and thenceforth, to his own satisfaction, and the immense delight and solace of the lady, he omitted not daily to pass that way, being careful to make it appear as if he came upon other business. 'Twas thus not long before the lady understood that she met with no less favour in his eyes than he in hers, and being desirous to add fuel to his flame, and to assure him of the love she bore him, as soon as time and occasion served, she returned to the holy friar, and having sat herself down at his feet in the church, fell a-weeping. The friar asked her in a soothing tone what her new trouble might be, whereto the lady answered, "My father, 'tis still that accursed friend of thine, of whom I made complaint to you some days ago, and who would now seem to have been born for my most grievous torment, and to cause me to do that by reason whereof I shall never be glad again, nor venture to place myself at your feet." "How?" said the friar, "has he not forborne to annoy thee?" "Not he indeed," said the lady. "On the contrary, 'tis my belief that, since I complained to you of him, he has, as if in despite, being offended, belike, that I did so, passed my house 7 times for once that he did so before. Nay, would to God he were content to pass and fix me with his eyes, but he is waxed so bold and unabashed that only yesterday he sent a woman to me at home with his compliments and cajoleries, and, as if I had not purses and girdles enough, he sent me a purse and a girdle, whereat I was, as I still am, so wroth, that, hath not conscience first, and then regard for you, weighed with me, I had flown into a frenzy of rage. However, I restrained myself, and resolved neither to do nor to say aught without first letting you know it. Nor only so, but lest the woman who brought the purse and girdle, and to whom I at first returned them, shortly bidding her begone, and take them back to the sender, I should keep them and tell him that I had accepted them, as I believe they sometimes do, I recalled her and had them back, albeit 'twas in no friendly spirit that I received them from her hand, and I have brought them to you, that you may return them to him, and tell him that I stand in no need of such gifts from him, because, thanks be to God and my husband, I have purses and girdles enough to smother him in. And if after this he leave me not alone, I pray you as my father to hold me excused if, come what may, I tell it to my husband and brothers, for much liefer had I that he suffer indignity, if so it must be, than that my fair fame should be sullied on his account that holds good friar." Weeping bitterly as she thus ended, she drew from under her robe a purse of very fine and ornate workmanship, and a dainty and costly little girdle, and threw them into the lap of the friar, who, fully believing what she said, manifested the utmost indignation as he took them, and said, "Daughter, that by these advances thou shouldst be moved to anger, I deem neither strange nor censurable, but I am instant with these to follow my advice in the matter. I tried him some days ago, and ill has he kept the promise that he made me, for which cause and this last feat of his I will surely make his ears so tingle that he will give thee no more trouble. Wherefore, for God's sake, let not thyself be so overcome with wrath as to tell it to any of thy kinsfolk, which might bring upon him a retribution greater than he deserves, nor fear lest thereby thy fair fame should suffer, for I shall ever be thy most sure witness before God and men that thou art innocent." The lady made a show of being somewhat comforted. Then, after a pause, for well she knew the greed of him and his likes, she said, "Of late, sir, by night, the spirits of divers of my kinsfolk have appeared to me in my sleep, and methinks they are in most grievous torment. Alms, alms they crave, naught else, especially my mother, who seems to be in so woeful and abject a plight that 'tis pitiful to see. Methinks 'tis the most grievous torment to her to see the tribulation which this enemy of God has brought upon me. I would therefore have you say for their souls the 40 masses of St. Gregory, and some of your prayers, that God may deliver them from this purging fire." So saying, she slipped a florin into the hand of the holy friar, who took it gleefully, and having with edifying words and many examples fortified her in her devotion, gave her his benediction, and suffered her to depart. The lady gone, the friar, who had still no idea of the trick that had been played upon him, sent for his friend, who was no sooner come than he gathered from the friar's troubled air that he had news of the lady, and waited to hear what he would say. The friar repeated what he had said before, and then broke out into violent and heated objurgation on the score of the lady's latest imputation. The gallant, who did not as yet apprehend the friar's drift, gave but a very faint denial to the charge of sending the purse and girdle, in order that he might not discredit the lady with the friar, if perchance she had given him the purse and girdle. Whereupon the friar exclaimed with great heat, "How canst thou deny it, thou wicked man? Why, here they are. She brought them to me in tears with her own hand. Look at them, and say if thou knowest them not." The gallant now feigned to be much ashamed, and said, "Why, yes, indeed, I do know them. I confess that I did wrong, and I swear to you that, now I know her character, you shall never hear word more of this matter." Many words followed, and then the blockheadly friar gave the purse and girdle to his friend, after which he read him a long lecture, besought him to meddle no more with such matters, and on his promising obedience, dismissed him. Elated beyond measure by the assurance which he now had of the lady's love, and the beautiful present, the gallant, on leaving the friar, hied him straight to a spot whence he stealthily gave the lady to see that he had both her gifts, whereat the lady was well content, the more so as her intrigue seemed ever to prosper more and more. She waited now only for her husband's departure from home to crown her enterprise with success. Nor was it long before occasion required that her husband should go to Genoa. The very morning that he took horse and rode away, she hied her to the holy friar, and after many a lamentation, said to him betwixt her sobs, "My father, now at last I tell you out and out that I can bear my suffering no longer. I promised you some days ago to do naught in this matter without first letting you know it. I am now come to crave release from that promise, and that you may believe that my lamentations and complaints are not groundless. I will tell you how this friend of yours, who should rather be called a devil let loose from hell, treated me only this very morning, a little before matins. As ill luck would have it, he learned, I know not how, that yesterday morning my husband went to Genoa, and so this morning, at the said hour, he came into my garden, and got up by a tree to the window of my bedroom, which looks out over the garden, and had already opened the casement, and was about to enter the room when I suddenly awoke, and got up and uttered a cry, and should have continued to cry out, had not he, who was still outside, implored my mercy for God's sake and yours, telling me who he was. So, for love of you I was silent, and, naked as I was born, ran and shut the window in his face, and he, bad luck to him, made off, I suppose, for I saw him no more. Consider now if such behaviour be seemly and tolerable. I, for my part, am minded to put up with no more of it. Indeed, I have endured too much already, for love of you." Wroth beyond measure was the friar as he heard her thus speak, nor knew he what to say, except that he several times asked her if she were quite certain that it was no other than he. "Holy name of God!" replied the lady, "as if I did not yet know him from another. He it was, I tell you, and do you give no credence to his denial?" "Daughter," said then the friar, "there is here naught else to say but that this is a monstrous presumption and a most heinous offence, and thou didst well to send him away as thou didst. But seeing that God had preserved thee from shame, I would implore thee that, as thou hast twice followed my advice, thou do so likewise on this occasion, and making no complaint to any of thy kinsfolk, leave it to me to try if I can control this devil that has slipped his chain, whom I suppose to be a saint, and if I succeed in weaning him from this insensate folly, well and good, and if I fail, thenceforth I give thee leave, with my blessing, to do whatsoever may commend itself to thy own judgment." "Lo now," answered the lady, "once again I will not vex or disobey you, but be sure that you so order matters that he refrain from further annoyance, as I give you my word that never will I have recourse to you again touching this matter." Then, without another word, and with a troubled air, she took leave of him. Scarcely was she out of the church when the gallant came out. The friar called him, took him aside, and gave him the affront in such sort as 'twas never before given to any man, reviling him as a disloyal and perjured traitor. The gallant, who, by his 2 previous lessons, had been taught how to value the friar's censures, listened attentively, and sought to draw him out by ambiguous answers. "Wherefore this wrath, sir?" he began. "Have I crucified Christ?" "Ay, mark the fellow's effrontery," retorted the friar. "List to what he says. He talks forsooth as if 'twere a year or so since, and his villainies and lewdness were clean gone from his memory for lapse of time. Between matins and now hast thou forgotten this morning's outrage? Where wast thou this morning shortly before daybreak?" "Where was I?" rejoined the gallant. "That know not I. 'Tis indeed betimes that the news has reached you." "True indeed it is," said the friar, "that the news has reached me. I suppose that, because the husband was not there, thou never doubtest that thou wouldst forthwith be received by the lady with open arms. Ah, gay gallant! The honourable gentleman, he is now turned prowler by night, and breaks into gardens, and climbs trees. Dost thou think, by sheer importunity, to vanquish the virtue of this lady, that thou escaladest her windows at night by the trees? She dislikes thee of all things in the world, and yet thou must still persist. Well indeed hast thou laid my admonitions to heart, to say nothing of the many proofs which she has given thee of her disdain. But I have yet a word for thee. Hitherto, not that she bears thee any love, but she has yielded to my urgent prayers. She has kept silence as to thy misdeeds. She will do so no more. I have given her leave to act as she may think fit, if thou givest her any further annoyance. And what wilt thou do if she informs her brothers?" The gallant, now fully apprised of what it imported him to know, was profuse in promises, whereby, as best he might, he reassured the friar, and so left him. The very next night, as soon as the matin hour was come, he entered the garden, climbed up the tree, found the window open, entered the chamber, and in a trice was in the embrace of his fair lady. Anxious as she expected him, and blithely did she now greet him, saying, "All thanks to Master Friar, that he so well taught thee the way hither." Then, with many a jest and laugh at the simplicity of the asinine friar, and many a flout at distaff-fuls and combs and cards, they solaced themselves with one another to their no small delight. Nor did they omit so to arrange matters that they were well able to dispense with Master Friar, and yet pass many another night together with no less satisfaction. To which goal I pray that I, and all other Christian souls that are so minded, may be speedily guided of God in his holy mercy. End of Day 3. The third story.
Day 3, the fourth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the fourth story. Dom Felice instructs Fra Puccio how to attain blessedness by doing a penance. Fra Puccio does the penance, and meanwhile Dom Felice has a good time with Fra Puccio's wife.
When Filomena, having concluded her story, was silent, and Dioneo had added a few honeyed phrases in praise of the lady's wit and Philomena's closing prayer, the queen glanced with a smile to Pamphilo and said, "Now, Pamphilo, give us some pleasant trifle to speed our delight." "That gladly I will," returned forthwith Pamphilo, and then,
Madam,
he began.
not a few there are that, while they use their best endeavours to get themselves places in paradise, do, by inadvertence, send others thither, as did, not long ago, betide a fair neighbour of ours, as you shall hear. Hard by San Pancrazio there used to live, as I have heard tell, a worthy man and wealthy, Puccio di Ranieri by name, who in later life, under an overpowering sense of religion, became a tertiary of the Order of St. Francis, and was thus known as Fra Puccio, in which spiritual life he was the better able to persevere that his household consisted but of a wife and a maid, and having no need to occupy himself with any craft, he spent no small part of his time at church, where, being a simple soul and slow of wit, he said his paternosters, heard sermons, assisted at the Mass, never missed lauds, that is, when chanted by the seculars, fasted and mortified his flesh. Nay, so 'twas whispered, he was of the flagellants. His wife, Monna Isabetta by name, a woman of from 28 to 30 summers, still young for her age, lusty, comely, and plump as a Castellan apple, had not unfrequently, by reason of her husband's devoutness, if not also of his age, more than she cared for, of abstinence. And when she was sleepy, or maybe riggish, he would repeat to her the life of Christ and the sermons of Fra Anastasio, or the lament of the Magdalene, or the like. Now, while such was the tenor of her life, there returned from Paris a young monk by name Dom Felice, of the convent of San Pancrazio, a well-favoured man and keen-witted, and profoundly learned, with whom Fra Puccio became very intimate. And as there was no question which he could put to him but Dom Felice could answer it, and moreover he made great show of holiness, for well he knew Fra Puccio's bent, Fra Puccio took to bringing him home, and entertaining him at breakfast and supper, as occasion served. And for love of her husband, the lady also grew familiar with Dom Felice, and was zealous to do him honour. So the monk, being a constant visitor of Fra Puccio's house, and seeing the lady so lusty and plump, surmised that of which she must have most lack, and made up his mind to afford, if he could, at once relief to Puccio and contentment to the lady. So cautiously, now and again, he cast an admiring glance in her direction with such effect that he kindled in her the same desire with which he burned, and marking his success, took the first opportunity to declare his passion to her. He found her fully disposed to gratify it, but how this might be he was at a loss to discover, for she would not trust herself with him in any place whatever except her own house, and there it could not be, because Fra Puccio never travelled, whereby the monk was greatly dejected. Long he pondered the matter, and at length thought of an expedient, whereby he might be with the lady in her own house, without incurring suspicion, notwithstanding that Fra Puccio was there. So, being with Fra Puccio one day, he said to him, "Reasons many have I to know, Fra Puccio, that all thy desire is to become a saint. But it seems to me that thou farest by a circuitous route, whereas there is one very direct, which the Pope and the greater prelates that are about him know and use, but will have it remain a secret, because otherwise the clergy, who for the most part live by alms, could not then expect alms or aught else from the laity, would be speedily ruined. However, as thou art my friend, and hast shown me much honour, I would teach thee that way, if I were assured that thou wouldst follow it without letting another soul in the world hear of it. Fra Puccio was now all agog to hear more of the matter, and began most earnestly entreating Dom Felice to teach him the way, swearing that without Dom Felice's leave none should ever hear of it from him, and averring that, if he found it practicable, he would certainly follow it. "I am satisfied with thy promises," said the monk, "and I will show thee the way. Know then that the holy doctors hold that whoso would achieve blessedness must do the penance of which I shall tell thee. But see thou take me judiciously. I do not say that after the penance thou wilt not be a sinner, as thou art, but the effect will be that the sins which thou hast committed up to the very hour of the penance will be purged away and thereby remitted to thee, and the sins which thou shalt commit thereafter will not be written against thee to thy damnation, but will be quit by holy water, like venial sins. First of all, then, the penitent must with great exactitude confess his sins when he comes to begin the penance. Then follows a period of fasting and very strict abstinence, which must last for 40 days, during which time he is to touch no woman whomsoever, not even his wife. Moreover, thou must have in thy house some place whence thou mayest see the sky by night, whither thou must resort at Compline. And there thou must have a beam, very broad, and placed in such a way that, standing, thou canst rest thy nether part upon it, and so, not raising thy feet from the ground, thou must extend thy arms so as to make a sort of crucifix, and if thou wouldst have pegs to rest them on, thou mayst. And on this manner, thy gaze fixed on the sky, and never moving a jot, thou must stand until matins. And wert thou lettered, it were proper for thee to say meanwhile certain prayers that I would give thee, but as thou art not so, thou must say 300 paternosters and as many Ave Marias in honour of the Trinity. And thus contemplating the sky, be ever mindful that God was the creator of the heaven and the earth, and being set even as Christ was upon the cross, meditate on his passion. Then, when the matin bell sounds, thou mayest, if thou please, go to bed, but see that thou undress not, and sleep. But in the morning thou must go to church, and hear at least 3 masses, and say 50 paternosters and as many Ave Marias. After which thou mayest with a pure heart do aught that thou hast to do, and breakfast. But at vespers thou must be again at church, and say there certain prayers, which I shall give thee in writing, and which are indispensable, and after Compline thou must repeat thy former exercise. Do this, and I, who have done it before thee, have good hope that even before thou shalt have reached the end of the penance, thou wilt, if thou should do it in a devout spirit, have already a marvellous foretaste of the eternal blessedness. This, said Fra Puccio, is neither a very severe nor a very long penance, and can be very easily arranged, wherefore in God's name I will begin on Sunday. And so he took his leave of Dom Felice, and went home, and by Dom Felice's permission informed his wife of every particular of his intended penance. The lady understood very well what the monk meant by enjoining him not to stir from his post until matins, and deeming it an excellent device, she said that she was well content that he should do this, or aught else that he thought good for his soul, and to the end that his penance might be blessed of God, she would herself fast with him, though she would go no further. So they did as they had agreed. When Sunday came, Fra Puccio began his penance, and Master Monk, by understanding with the lady, came, most evenings, at the hour when he was secure from discovery, to sup with her, always bringing with him abundance both of meat and of drink, and after slept with her till the matin hour, when he got up and left her, and Fra Puccio went to bed. The place where Fra Puccio had chosen for his penance was close to the room in which the lady slept, and only separated from it by the thinnest of partitions, so that, the monk and the lady disporting themselves with one another without stint or restraint, Fra Puccio thought he felt the floor of the house shake a little, and pausing at his 100th paternoster, but without leaving his post, called out to the lady to know what she was about. The lady, who dearly loved a jest, and was just then riding the horse of Saint Benedict or Saint John Gualbert, answered, "I'faith, husband, I'm as restless as may be." "Restless?" said Fra Puccio. "How so? What means this restlessness?" Whereto, with a hearty laugh, for which she doubtless had good occasion, the bonny lady replied, "What means it? How should you ask such a question? Why, I have heard you say 1,000 times, 'Who fasting goes to bed, uneasy lies his head.'" Fra Puccio, supposing that her wakefulness and restlessness abed was due to want of food, said in good faith, "Wife, I told thee I would have thee not fast, but as thou hast chosen to fast, think not of it, but think how you mayest compose thyself to sleep. Thou tossest about the bed in such sort that the shaking is felt here." "That need cause thee no alarm," rejoined the lady. "I know what I am about. I will manage as well as I can, and do thou likewise." So Fra Puccio said no more to her, but resumed his paternosters. And thenceforth, every night, while Fra Puccio's penance lasted, the lady and master monk, having had a bed made up for them in another part of the house, did there wanton it most gamesomely, the monk departing and the lady going back to her bed, at one and the same time, being shortly before Fra Puccio's return from his nightly vigil. The friar thus persisting in his penance while the lady took her fill of pleasure with the monk, she would from time to time say jestingly to him, "Thou layest a penance upon Fra Puccio whereby we are rewarded with paradise." So well indeed did she relish the dainties with which the monk regaled her, the more so by contrast with the abstemious life to which her husband had long accustomed her, that, when Fra Puccio's penance was done, she found means to enjoy them elsewhere, and ordered her indulgence with such discretion as to ensure its long continuance. Whereby, that my story may end as it began, it came to pass that Fra Puccio, hoping by his penance to win a place for himself in paradise, did, in fact, translate thither the monk who had shown him the way, and the wife who lived with him in great dearth of that which the monk, in his charity, gave her superabundant largesse. End of Day 3, the fourth story.
Day 3, the fifth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the fifth story. Zima gives a palfrey to Messer Francesco Vergellesi, who in return suffers him to speak with his wife. She keeping silence, he answers in her stead, and the sequel is in accordance with his answer.
When Pamphilo had brought the story of Fra Puccio to a close amid the laughter of the ladies, the queen debonairly bade Elisa to follow suit, and she, whose manner had in it a slight touch of severity, which betokened not despite, but was habitual to her, thus began.
Many there are that being very knowing think that others are quite the reverse, and so many a time, thinking to beguile others, are themselves beguiled. Wherefore I deem it the height of folly for any one wantonly to challenge another to a contest of wit. But as perchance all may not be of the same opinion, I am minded, without deviating from the prescribed order, to acquaint you with that which thereby befell a certain knight of Pistoia. Know then that at Pistoia there lived a knight, Messer Francesco by name, of the Vercellesi family, a man of much wealth and good parts, being both wise and clever, but withal niggardly beyond measure; which Messer Francesco, having to go to Milan in the capacity of podestà, had provided himself with all that was meet for the honourable support of such a dignity, save only a palfrey handsome enough for him, and not being able to come by any such, he felt himself at a loss. Now there was then in Pistoia a young man, Ricciardo by name, of low origin but great wealth, who went always so trim and fine and foppish of person, that folk had bestowed upon him the name of Zima, by which he was generally known. Zima had long and to no purpose burned and yearned for love of Messer Francesco's very fair and no less virtuous wife. His passion was matter of common notoriety, and so it befell that some one told Messer Francesco that he had but to ask Zima, who was the possessor of one of the handsomest palfreys in Tuscany, which on that account he greatly prized, and he would not hesitate to give him the horse for the love which he bore his wife. So our niggardly knight sent for Zima, and offered to buy the horse of him, hoping thereby to get him from Zima as a gift. Zima heard the knight gladly, and thus made answer: "Sell you my horse, sir, I would not, though you gave me all that you have in the world; but I shall be happy to give him to you when you will, on this condition, that before he pass into your hands, I may, by your leave and in your presence, say a few words to your wife, so privately that I may be heard by her alone." Thinking at once to gratify his cupidity and to outwit Zima, the knight answered that he was content that it should be even as Zima wished. Then, leaving him in the hall of the palace, he went to his lady's chamber, and told her the easy terms on which he might acquire the palfrey, bidding her give Zima his audience, but on no account to vouchsafe him a word of reply. This the lady found by no means to her mind, but, as she must needs obey her husband's commands, she promised compliance, and followed him into the hall to hear what Zima might have to say. Zima then renewed his contract with the knight in due form, whereupon the lady being seated in a part of the hall where she was quite by herself, he sat down by her side, and thus began: "Noble lady, I have too much respect for your understanding to doubt that you have long been well aware of the extremity of passion whereto I have been brought by your beauty, which certainly exceeds that of any other lady that I have ever seen, to say nothing of your exquisite manners and incomparable virtues, which might well serve to captivate every soaring spirit that is in the world. Wherefore there need no words of mine to assure you that I love you with a love greater and more ardent than any that man yet bore to woman, and so without doubt I shall do, as long as my woeful life shall hold this frame together, nay longer yet, for if love there be in the next world as in this, I shall love you evermore. And so you may make your mind secure that there is nothing that is yours, be it precious or be it common, which you may count as in such, and so sure a sort your own as me, for all that I am and have; and that thereof you may not lack evidence of infallible cogency, I tell you that I should deem myself more highly favored, if I might, at your command, do somewhat to pleasure you, than if at my command the whole world were forthwith to yield me obedience. And as this even in such sort that I am yours, 'tis not unworthily that I make bold to offer my petitions to your highness, as being to me the sole exclusive source of all peace, of all bliss, of all health. Wherefore, as your most lowly vassal, I pray you, dear my bliss, my soul's one hope, wherein she nourishes herself in love's devouring flame, that in your great benignity you deign so far to mitigate the harshness which in the past you have shown towards me, yours thought I am, that consoled by your compassion, I may say that, as 'twas by your beauty that I was smitten with love, so 'tis to your pity that I owe my life, which if in your haughtiness you lend not ear unto my prayers, will assuredly fail, so that I shall die, and it may be 'twill be said that you slew me. 'Twould not redound to your honor that I died for love of you, but let that pass, I cannot but think, however, that you would sometimes feel a touch of remorse, and would grieve that 'twas your doing, and that now and again, relenting, you would say to yourself, ah, how wrong it was of me that I had not pity on my Zima, by which too late repentance you would but enhance your grief. Whereof, that this come not to pass, repent you while it is in your power to give me ease, and show pity on me before I die, seeing that with you it rests to make me either the gladdest or the saddest man that lives. My trust is in your generosity, that will not brook that a love so great, and of such a sort as mine, should receive death for guerdon, and that by a gladsome and gracious answer you will repair my shattered spirits, which are all a tremble in your presence for very fear. When he had done, he heaved several very deep sighs, and a few tears started from his eyes, while he awaited the latest answer. Long time he had wooed her with his eyes, had tilted in her honor, had greeted her rising with music, and against these and all like modes of attack she had been proof, but the heartfelt words of her most ardent lover were not without their effect, and she now began to understand what she had never till then understood, to wit, what love really means. So albeit she obeyed her lord's behest and kept silence, yet she could not but betray by a slight sigh that which, if she might have given Zima his answer, she would readily have avowed. After waiting a while, Zima found it strange that no answer was forthcoming, and he then began to perceive the trick which the knight had played him. However, he kept his eyes fixed on the lady, and, observing that her eyes glowed now and again as they met his, and noting the partially suppressed sighs which escaped her, he gathered a little hope, which gave him courage to try a novel plan of attack. So while the lady listened, he began to make answer for herself to himself on this wise: "Zima, mine, true indeed it is that long since I discerned that thou didst love me with a love exceeding great and wholehearted, whereof I have now yet ampler assurance by thine own words, and well content I am therewith, as indeed I ought to be. And however harsh and cruel I may have seemed to thee, I would by no means have thee believe that I have been such a heart as I have seemed in aspect. Rather be assured that I have ever loved thee and held thee dear above all other men. The man which I have worn was but prescribed by fear of another, and solicitude for my fair frame. But a time will soon come when I shall be able to give thee plain proof of my love, and to accord the love which thou hast borne and dost bear me its due guerdon. Wherefore be comforted and of good hope, for Messer Francesco is to go in a few days' time to Milan as podestà, as thou well knowest, seeing that for love of me thou hast given him thy fine palfrey. And I vow to thee upon my faith, upon the true love which I bear thee, that without fail, within a few days thereafter, thou shalt be with me, and we will give our love complete and gladsome consummation." and that I may have no more occasion to speak to thee of this matter, be it understood between us that henceforth when thou shalt observe two towels disposed at the window of my room which overlooks the garden, thou shalt come to me after nightfall of that same day by the garden door, and look well to it that thou be not seen, and thou shalt find me waiting for thee, and we will have our fill of mutual cheer and solace all night long." Having thus answered for the lady, Zima resumed his own person and thus replied to the lady: "Dearest madam, your boon response so overpowers my every faculty that scarce can I frame words to render you due thanks, and were I able to utter all I feel, time, however long, would fail me fully to thank you, as I would fain, and as I ought, wherefore I must even leave it to your sage judgment to divine that which I yearn in vain to put in words. Let this one word suffice, that as you bid me, so I shall not fail to do, and then having, perchance, firmer assurance of the great boon which you have granted me, I will do my best endeavor to thank you in terms the amplest that I may command. For the present there is no more to say, and so, dearest my lady, I commend you to God, and may He grant you your heart's content of joy and bliss." To all which the lady returned never a word, wherefore Zima rose and turned to rejoin the knight, who, seeing him on his feet, came towards him and said with a laugh, "How sayest thou? Have I faithfully kept my promise to thee?" "Not so, sir," replied Zima, "for by thy word I was to have spoken with thy wife, and by thy deed I have spoken to a statue of marble." Which remark was much relished by the knight, who, well as he had thought of his wife, thought now even better of her, and said, "So thy palfrey that was is now mine, out and out." "'Tis even so, sir," replied Zima, "but had I thought to have gotten such fruit as I have from this favor of yours, I would not have craved it, but would have let you have the palfrey as a free gift, and would to God I had done so, for, as it is, you have bought the palfrey and I have not sold him." This drew a laugh from the knight, who within a few days thereafter mounted the palfrey which he had gotten, and took the road for Milan, there to enter on his podestate. The lady, now mistress of herself, bethought her of Zima's words, and the love which he bore her, and for which he had parted with his palfrey, and observing that he frequently passed her house, said to herself, "What am I about? Why throw I my youth away? My husband is gone to Milan, and will not return for 6 months, and when can he ever restore them to me? When I am old? And besides, shall I ever find another such lover as Zima? I am quite by myself, there's none to fear. I know not why I take not my good time while I may. I shall not always have the like opportunity as at present, no one will ever know, and if I should get known, 'tis better to do and repent than to forbear and repent." Of which meditations the issue was that one day she set two towels in the window overlooking the garden, according to Zima's word, and Zima, having remarked them with much exultation, stole at nightfall alone to the door of the lady's garden, and finding it open, crossed to another door that led into the house, where he found the lady awaiting him. On sight of him she rose to meet him, and gave him the heartiest of welcomes. 100,000 times he embraced and kissed her as he followed her upstairs. Then without delay they hied them to bed, and knew love's furthest bourne. And so far was the first time from being in this case the last, that while the knight was at Milan, and indeed after his return, there were seasons, not a few, at which Zima resorted thither to the immense delight of both parties. End of Day 3, the 5th story.
Day 3, the 6th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 6th story. Ricciardo Monutolo loves the wife of Filippello Figinolfi, and knowing her to be jealous, makes her believe that his own wife is to meet Filippello at a bagnio on the ensuing day, whereby she is induced to go thither, where, thinking to have been with her husband, she discovers that she has tarried with Ricciardo.
When Elisa had quite done, the queen, after some commendation of Zima's sagacity, bade Fiammetta follow with the story, whereto Fiammetta, all smiles, responded,
Madam, with all my heart.
and thus began.
Richly though our city abounds, as in all things else, so also in instances to suit every topic, yet I am minded to journey some distance thence, and, like Elisa, to tell you something of what goes on in other parts of the world. Wherefore pass we to Naples, where you shall hear how one of these sanctified that show themselves so shy of love was by the subtlety of her lover brought to taste to the fruit before she had known the flowers of love, whereby at one and the same time you may derive from the past counsel of prudence for the future, and present delectation. In the very ancient city of Naples, which for loveliness has not its superior, or perhaps its equal, in Italy, there once lived a young man, renowned alike for noble blood and the splendor of his vast wealth, his name Ricciardo Monutolo. He was mated with a very fair and loving wife, but nevertheless he became enamored of a lady who in the general opinion vastly surpassed in beauty every other lady in Naples. Catella, such was the lady's name, was married to a young man, likewise of gentle blood, Filippello Figinolfi by name, whom she, most virtuous of ladies, loved and held dear above all else in the world. Being thus enamored of Catella, Ricciardo Monutolo left none of those means untried whereby a lady's favour and love are wont to be gained, but for all that he made no way towards the attainment of his heart's desire, whereby he fell into a sort of despair, and witless and powerless to lose himself from his love, found life scarce tolerable, and yet knew not how to die. While in this frame he languished, it befell one day that some ladies that were of kin to him counselled him earnestly to be quit of such a love, whereby he could but fret himself to no purpose, seeing that Catella cared for naught in the world except Filippello, and lived in such a state of jealousy on his account that never a bird flew but she feared lest it would snatch him from her. So soon as Ricciardo heard of Catella's jealousy, he forthwith began to ponder how he might make it subserve his end. He feigned to have given up his love for Catella as hopeless, and to have transferred it to another lady, in whose honour he accordingly began to tilt and joust, and do all that he had been wont to do in honour of Catella. Nor was it long before well nigh all the Neapolitans, including Catella herself, began to think that he had forgotten Catella, and was to the last degree enamoured of the other lady. In this course he persisted, until the opinion was so firmly rooted in the minds of all that even Catella laid aside a certain reserve which she had used towards him, while she deemed him her lover, and coming and going greeted him in friendly neighbourly fashion, like the rest. Now it so befell that during the hot season, when, according to the custom of Neapolitans, many companies of ladies and gentlemen went down to the sea-coast to recreate themselves, and breakfast and sup, Ricciardo, knowing that Catella was gone thither with her company, went likewise with his, but making as if he were not minded to stay there, he he received several invitations from the ladies of Catella's company before he accepted any. When the ladies received him, they all with one accord, including Catella, began to rally him on his new love, and he furnished them with more matter for talk by feigning a most ardent passion. At length, most of the ladies being gone off, one hither, one thither, as they do in such places, leaving Catella and a few others with Ricciardo, he tossed at Catella a light allusion to a certain love of her husband Filippello, which threw her at once into such a fit of jealousy that she inly burned with a vehement desire to know what Ricciardo meant. For a while she kept her own counsel, then, brooking no more suspense, she adjured Ricciardo, by the love he bore the lady whom most he loved, to expound to her what he had said touching Filippello. He answered thus: "You have adjured me by her to whom I dare not deny aught that you may ask of me. My riddle, therefore, I will presently read you, provided you promise me that neither to him nor to any one else will you impart aught of what I shall relate to you, until you shall have ocular evidence of its truth, which, so you desire it, I will teach you how you may obtain." The lady accepted his terms, which rather confirmed her belief in his veracity, and swore that she would not tell a soul. They then drew a little apart, that they might not be overheard by the rest, and Ricciardo thus began: "Madam, did I love you as I once did, I should not dare to tell you aught that I thought might cause you pain, but now that that love is past, I shall have the less hesitation in telling you the truth. Whether Filippello ever resented the love which I bore you, or deemed that it was returned by you, I know not. Whether it were so or no, he certainly never showed any such feeling to me, but so it is that now, having waited, perhaps, until he supposes I am less likely to be on my guard, he shows a disposition to serve me, as I doubt he suspects that I served him. That is to say, he would fain have his pleasure with my wife, whom for some time past he has, as I discover, plied with messages through most secret channels. She has told me all, and has answered him according to my instructions, but only this morning, just before I came hither, I found a woman in close parley with her in the house, whose true character and purpose I forthwith divined, so I called my wife and asked her what the woman wanted. Whereto she answered, "'Tis this persecution by Filippello which thou hast brought upon me by the encouraging answers that thou wouldst have me give him. He now tells me that he is most earnestly desirous to know my intentions, and that, should I be so minded, he would contrive that I should have secret access to a bagnio in this city, and he is most urgent and instant that I should consent. And hadst thou not, wherefore I know not, bidden me keep the affair afoot, I would have dismissed him in such a sort that my movements would have been exempt from his prying observation forever." Upon this I saw that the affair was going too far. I determined to have no more of it, and to let you know it, that you may understand how he requites your whole-hearted faith, which brought me of late to the verge of death. And that you may not suppose that these are but empty words and idle tales, but may be able, should you so desire, to verify them by sight and touch, I caused my wife to tell the woman who still waited her answer that she would be at the bagnio tomorrow about noon, during the siesta, with which answer the woman went away well content. Now you do not, I suppose, imagine that I would send her thither, but if I were in your place, he should find me there instead of her whom he thinks to find there, and when I had been some little time with him, I would give him to understand with whom he had been, and he should have of me such honour as he deserved. Whereby I doubt not he would be put to such shame as would at one and the same time avenge both the wrong which he has done to you and that which he plots against me. Catella, as is the wont of the jealous, hearkened to Ricciardo's words, and, without so much as giving a thought to the speaker or his wiles, inclined at once to credit his story, and began to twist certain antecedent matters into accord with it. Then, suddenly kindling with wrath, she answered, that to the bagnio she would certainly go, 'twould cause her no great inconvenience, and if he should come she would so shame him that he should never again set eyes on woman but his ears would tingle. Satisfied by what he heard, that his stratagem was well conceived, and success sure, Ricciardo added much in corroboration of his story, and having thus confirmed her belief in it, besought her to keep it always close, whereto she pledged her faith. Next morning Ricciardo hied him to the good woman that kept the bagnio, to which he had directed Catella, told her the enterprise which he had in hand, and prayed her to aid him therein so far as she might be able. The good woman, who was much beholden to him, assured him that she would gladly do so, and concerted with him all that was to be said and done. She had in the bagnio a room which was very dark, being without any window to admit the light. This room, by Ricciardo's direction, she set in order, and made up a bed there as well as she could, into which bed Ricciardo got, as soon as he had breakfasted, and there awaited Catella's coming. Now Catella, still giving more credence to Ricciardo's story than it merited, had gone home in the evening in a most resentful mood, and Filippello, returning home the same evening with a mind greatly preoccupied, was scarce as familiar with her as he was wont to be. Which she marking, grew yet more suspicious than before, and said to herself, doubtless he is thinking of the lady of whom he expects to take his pleasure tomorrow, as most assuredly he shall not. And so, musing and meditating what she should say to him after their encounter at the bagnio, she spent the best part of the night. But, to shorten my story, upon the stroke of noon, Catella, taking with her a single attendant, but otherwise adhering to her original intention, hied her to the bagnio which Ricciardo had indicated, and finding the good woman there, asked her whether Filippello had been there that day. Prying by Ricciardo, the good woman asked her whether she were the lady that was to come to speak with him, to which she answered in the affirmative. Go to him then, said the good woman. And so Catella, in quest of that which she would gladly not have found, was shown to the chamber where Ricciardo was, and having entered without uncovering her head, closed the door behind her. Overjoyed to see her, Ricciardo sprang out of bed, took her in his arms, and said caressingly, Welcome, my soul. Catella, dissembling, for she was minded at first to counterfeit another woman, returned his embrace, kissed him, and lavished endearments upon him, saying the while not a word, lest her speech should betray her. The darkness of the room, which was profound, was equally welcome to both, nor were they there long enough for their eyes to recover power. Ricciardo helped Catella on to the bed, where, with no word said on either side, in a voice that might be recognized, they lay a long while, much more to the solace and satisfaction of the one than of the other party. Then Catella, deeming it high time to vent her harboured resentment, burst forth in a blaze of wrath on this wise. Alas, how wretched is the lot of women, how misplaced of not a few the love they bear their husbands! Ah, woe is me! For 8 years I have loved thee more dearly than my life, and now I find that thou, base miscreant that thou art, dost naught but burn and languish for love of another woman. Here thou hast been, with whom, thinkest thou? Even with her whom thou hast long deluded with thy false blandishments, making pretence to love her, while thou art enamoured of another. 'Tis I, Catella, not the wife of Ricciardo, false traitor that thou art. List if thou knowest my voice, 'tis I indeed. Ah, would we were but in the light! It seems to me 1,000 years till then, that I might shame thee as thou deservest, vile pestilent dog that thou art. Alas, woe is me! Such love as I have borne so many years. To whom? To this faithless dog, that, thinking to have a strange woman in his embrace, has in the brief while that I have been with him here lavished upon me more caresses and endearments than during all the forepast time that I have been his. A lively spark indeed art thou to-day, renegade dog, that showest thyself so limp and enervate and impotent at home. But God be praised, thou hast tilled thine own plot, and not another's, as thou didst believe. No wonder that last night thou heldest aloof from me. Thou wast thinking of scattering thy seed elsewhere, and wast minded to show thyself a lusty knight when thou shouldst join battle. But praise be to God and my sagacity, the water has nevertheless taken its proper course. Where is thy answer, culprit? Hast thou naught to say? Have my words struck thee dumb? God's faith! I know not why I forbear to pluck thine eyes out with my fingers. Thou thoughtest to perpetrate this treason with no small secrecy, but, by God, one is as knowing as another, thy plot has failed. I had better hounds on thy trail than thou didst think for. Ricciardo, inly delighted by her words, made no answer, but embraced and kissed her more than ever, and overwhelmed her with his endearments. So she continued her reproaches, saying, Ay, thou thinkest to cajole me with thy feigned caresses, wearisome dog that thou art, and so to pacify and mollify me, but thou art mistaken. I shall never be mollified until I have covered thee with infamy in the presence of all our kinsfolk and friends and neighbours. Am I not, miscreant, as fair as the wife of Ricciardo Monutolo? Am I not as good a lady as she? Why dost not answer, vile dog? Wherein has she the advantage of me? Away with thee, touch me not. Thou hast done feats of arms more than enough for to-day. Well, I know that, now that thou knowest who I am, thou wilt wreak thy will on me by force. But by God's grace, I will yet disappoint thee. I know not why I forbear to send for Ricciardo, who loved me more than himself, and yet was never able to boast that he had a single glance from me, nor know I why 'twere wrong to do so. Thou thoughtest to have his wife here, and 'tis no fault of thine that thou hadst her not. So if I had him, thou couldst not justly blame me. Enough had now been said. The lady's mortification was extreme, and as she ended, Ricciardo bethought him that, if he suffered her, thus deluded, to depart, much evil might ensue. He therefore resolved to make himself known, and disabuse her of her error. So, taking her in his arms, and clipping her so close that she could not get loose, he said, Sweet my soul, be not wroth. That which while artlessly I loved, I might not have, love has taught me to compass by guile. Know that I am thy Ricciardo. At these words, and the voice, which she recognized, Catella started, and would have sprung out of the bed, which being impossible, she essayed a cry, but Ricciardo laid a hand upon her mouth and closed it, saying, Madam, that which is done can never be undone, though ye should cry out for the rest of your days, and should you in such or any other wise publish this matter to any, two consequences will ensue. In the first place, and this is a point which touches you very nearly, your honor and fair fame will be blasted, for however you may say that I lured you hither by guile, I shall deny it, and affirm, on the contrary, that I induced you to come hither by promises of money and gifts, and that 'tis but because you are vexed, that what I gave you did not altogether come up to your expectations, that you make such a cry and clamour. And you know that folk are more prone to believe evil than good, and therefore I am no less likely to believe than you. The further consequence will be mortal enmity between your husband and me, and the event were as like to be that I killed him as that he killed me, which if I did, you would never more know joy or peace. Wherefore, heart of my body, do not at one and the same time bring your dishonour upon yourself, and set your husband and me at strife and in jeopardy of our lives. You are not the first, nor will you be the last, to be beguiled, nor have I beguiled you to rob you of aught, but for excess of love that I bear, and shall ever bear you, being your most lowly vassal. And though it is now a great while that I, and what I have and can and am worth, are yours, yet I am minded that so it shall be henceforth more than ever before. Your discretion in other matters is not unknown to me, and I doubt not 'twill be equally manifest in this. Ricciardo's admonitions were received by Catella with many a bitter tear, but though she was very wroth and very sad at heart, yet Ricciardo's true words so far commanded the assent of her reason that she acknowledged that 'twas possible they might be verified by the event. Wherefore she made answer, Ricciardo, I know not how God will grant me patience to bear the villainy and knavery which thou hast practised upon me, and though in this place, to which simplicity and excess of jealousy guided my steps, I raise no cry, rest assured that I shall never be happy, until in one way or another I know myself avenged of that which thou hast done to me. Wherefore unhand me, let me go. Thou hast had the desire of me, and hast tormented me to thy heart's content. 'Tis time to release me, let me go, I pray thee. But Ricciardo, seeing that she was still much ruffled in spirit, was resolved not to let her go until he made his peace with her. So he addressed himself to soothe her, and by dint of most dulcet phrases, and entreaties and adjurations, he did at last prevail with her to give him her pardon. Nay, by joint consent they tarried there a great while, to the exceeding great delight of both. Indeed the lady, finding her lover's kisses smack much better than those of her husband, converted her asperity into sweetness, and from that day forth cherished a most tender love for Ricciardo, whereof, using all circumspection, they many a time had solace. God grant us solace of ours. End of Day 3, the 6th story.
Day 3, the 7th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anna Simon. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 7th story. Tebaldo, being in disfavour with his lady, departs from Florence. He returns thither after a while in the guise of a pilgrim, has speech of his lady, and makes her sensible of her fault. Her husband, convicted of slaying him, he delivers from peril of death, reconciles him with his brothers, and thereafter discreetly enjoys his lady.
So ceased Fiammetta, and, when all had bestowed on her their meed of praise, the queen, to lose no time, forthwith bade Emilia resume the narration. So thus Emilia began.
I am minded to return to our city, whence my two last predecessors saw fit to depart, and to show you how one of our citizens recovered the lady he had lost. Know then that there was in Florence a young noble, his name Tebaldo Elisei, who, being beyond measure enamoured of a lady hight Monna Ermelina, wife of one Aldobrandino Palermini, and by reason of his admirable qualities richly deserving to have his desire, found fortune nevertheless adverse, as she is wont to be to the prosperous. Inasmuch as, for some reason or another, the lady, having shown herself gracious towards Tebaldo for a while, completely altered her mien, and not only showed him no further favour, but would not so much as receive a message from him, or suffer him to see her face, whereby he fell a prey to a grievous and distressful melancholy. But so well had he concealed his love, that the cause of his melancholy was surmised by none. He tried hard in divers ways to recover the love which he deemed himself to have lost for no fault of his, and finding all his efforts unavailing, he resolved to bid the world adieu, that he might not afford her who was the cause of his distress the satisfaction of seeing him languish. So he got together as much money as he might, and secretly, no word said to friend or kinsman except only a familiar gossip, who knew all, he took his departure for Ancona. Arrived there, he assumed the name of Filippo Santodecchio, and having foregathered with a rich merchant, entered his service. The merchant took him with him to Cyprus aboard one of his ships, and was so well pleased with his bearing and behaviour that he not only gave him a handsome salary, but made him in a sort his companion, and entrusted him with the management of no small part of his affairs, wherein he proved himself so apt and assiduous that in the course of a few years he was himself established in credit and wealth and great repute as a merchant. 7 years thus passed, during which, albeit his thoughts frequently reverted to his cruel mistress, and sorely love smote him, and much he yearned to see her again, yet such was his firmness that he came off conqueror,
until one day in Cyprus it so befell that there was sung in his hearing a song that he had himself composed, and of which the theme was the mutual love that was between his lady and him, and the delight that he had of her; which as he heard, he found it incredible that she should have forgotten him, and burned with such a desire to see her once more that, being able to hold out no longer, he made up his mind to return to Florence. So, having set all his affairs in order, he betook him, attended only by a single servant, to Ancona, whence he sent all his effects as they arrived forward to Florence, consigning them to a friend of his encontent partner, and followed with his servant in the disguise of a pilgrim returned from the Holy Sepulchre. Arrived at Florence, he put up at a little hostelry kept by two brothers hard by his lady's house, whither he forthwith hied him, hoping that, perchance, he might have sight of her from the street. But, finding all barred and bolted, doors, windows, and all else, he doubted much she must be dead, or have removed thence. So, with a very heavy heart, he returned to the house of the two brothers, and to his great surprise found his own four brothers standing in front of it, all in black. He knew that he was so changed from his former semblance, both in dress and in person, that he might not readily be recognized, and he had therefore no hesitation in going up to a shoemaker and asking him why these men were all dressed in black. The shoemaker answered, "'Tis because 'tis not 15 days since a brother of theirs, Tedaldo by name, that had been long abroad, was slain, and I understand that they have proved in court that one Aldobrandino Palermini, who is under arrest, did the deed, because Tedaldo, who loved his wife, was come back to Florence incognito to foregather with her." Tedaldo found it passing strange that there should be anyone so like him as to be mistaken for him, and deplored Aldobrandino's evil plight. He had learned, however, that the lady was alive and well. So, as 'twas now night, he hied him, much perplexed in mind, into the inn, and supped with his servant. The bedroom assigned him was almost at the top of the house, and the bed was none of the best. Thoughts many and disquieting haunted his mind, and his supper had been but light. Whereby it befell that midnight came and went, and Tedaldo was still awake. As thus he watched, he heard shortly after midnight a noise as of persons descending from the roof into the house, and then through the chinks of the door of his room he caught the flicker of an ascending light. Wherefore he stole softly to the door, and peeping through a chink to make out what was afoot, he saw a very fine young woman bearing a light, and 3 men making towards her, being evidently those that had descended from the roof. The men exchanged friendly greetings with the young woman, and then one said to her, "Now, God be praised, we may make our minds easy, for we are well assured that judgment for the death of Tedaldo Elisei is gotten by his brothers against Aldobrandino Palermini, and he has confessed, and the sentence is already drawn up. But still it behoves us to hold our peace, for, should it ever get abroad that we were guilty, we shall stand in the like jeopardy as Aldobrandino." So saying, they took leave of the woman, who seemed much cheered, and went to bed. What he had heard set Tedaldo musing on the number and variety of the errors to which men are liable; as first, how his brothers had mourned and interned a stranger in his stead, and then charged an innocent man upon false suspicion, and by false witness brought him into imminent peril of death; from which he passed to ponder the blind severity of laws and magistrates, who, from misguided zeal to elicit the truth, not unfrequently become ruthless, and, adjudging that which is false, forfeit the title which they claim of ministers of God and justice, and do but execute the mandates of iniquity and the evil one. And so he came at last to consider the possibility of saving Aldobrandino, and formed a plan for the purpose. Accordingly, on the morrow, when he was risen, he left his servant at the inn, and hied him alone, at what he deemed a convenient time, to his lady's house, where, finding by chance the door open, he entered and saw his lady sitting, all tears and lamentations, in a little parlour on the ground floor. Whereat he all but wept for sympathy, and drawing near her, he said, "Madam, be not troubled in spirit, your peace is nigh you." Whereupon the lady raised her head, and said between her sobs, "Good man, what dost thou, a pilgrim, if I mistake not, from distant parts, know either of my peace or of my affliction?" "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "I am of Constantinople, and am but now come hither at God's behest, that I may give you laughter for tears, and deliver your husband from death." "But," said the lady, "if thou art of Constantinople, and but now arrived, how is that thou knowest either who my husband is or who I am?" Whereupon the pilgrim gave her the whole narrative from the very beginning of Aldobrandino's sufferings. He also told her who she was, how long she had been married, and much besides that was known to him of her affairs. Whereat the lady was lost in wonder, and, taking him to be a prophet, threw herself on her knees at his feet, and besought him for God's sake, if he were come to save Aldobrandino, to lose no time, for the matter brooked no delay. Thus adjured, the pilgrim assumed an air of great sanctity, as he said, "Arise, madam, weep not, but hearken diligently to what I shall say to you, and look to it that you impart it to none. I have it by revelation of God that the tribulation wherein you stand is come upon you in requital of a sin which you did once commit, of which God is minded that this suffering be a partial purgation, and that you make reparation in full if you would not find yourself in a far more grievous plight." "Sir," replied the lady, "many sins have I committed, nor know I how among them all to single out that whereof, more than another, God requires reparation at my hands. Wherefore, if you know it, tell it me, and what by way of reparation I may do, that will I do." "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "well wot I what it is, nor shall I question you thereof for my better instruction, but that the rehearsal may give you increase or remorse therefore. But pass we now to fact. Tell me, mind you ever to have had a lover?" Whereat the lady heaved a deep sigh. Then, marvelling not a little, for she had thought it was known to none, albeit on the day when the man was slain, who was afterwards buried as Tidaldo, there had been some buzz about it, occasioned by some indiscreet words dropped by Tidaldo's gossip and confidant, she made answer, "I see that there is naught that man keeps secret but God reveals it to you, wherefore I shall not endeavour to hide my secrets from you. True it is that in my youth I was beyond measure enamoured of the unfortunate young man whose death is imputed to my husband, whom I mourned with grief unfeigned, for, albeit I showed myself harsh and cruel towards him before his departure, yet neither thereby, nor by his long absence, nor yet by his calamitous death, was my heart estranged from him." Then said the pilgrim, "'Twas not the unfortunate young man now dead that you did love, but Tidaldo Elisei. But let that pass. Now tell me, wherefore lost he your good graces? Did he ever offend you?" "Nay, verily," answered the lady, "he never offended me at all. My harshness was prompted by an accursed friar, to whom I once confessed, and who, when I told him of the love I bore Tidaldo, and my intimacy with him, made my ears so tingle and sing that I still shudder to think of it, warning me that, if I gave it not up, I should fall into the jaws of the devil in the abyss of hell, and be cast into the avenging fire. Whereby I was so terrified that I quite made my mind up to discontinue my intimacy with him, and, to trench the matter, I would thenceforth have none of his letters or messages. And so, I suppose, he went away in despair. Though I doubt not, had he persevered a while longer, I should not have seen him wasting away like snow in sunshine, without relenting of my harsh resolve. For, in sooth, there was nothing in the world I would so gladly have done." Then said the pilgrim, "Madam, 'tis this sin, and this only, that has brought upon you your present tribulation. I know positively that Tidaldo did never put force upon you. 'Twas of your own free will, and for that he pleased you, that you became enamoured of him. Your constant visitor, your intimate friend he became, because you yourself would have it so. And in the course of your intimacy you showed him such favour by word and deed that, if he loved you first, you multiplied his love full 1,000-fold. And if so it was, and well yourself from him, you should have considered the whole matter before the die was cast, and not have entered upon it, if you deemed you might have cause to repent you of it as a sin. As soon as he became yours, you became his. Had he not been yours, you might have acted as you had thought fit, at your own unfettered discretion. But as you were his, 'twas robbery, 'twas conduct most disgraceful, to sever yourself from him against his will. Now you must know that I am a friar, and therefore all the ways of friars are familiar to me. Nor does it misbecome me, as it might another, to speak for your behoof somewhat freely of them, as I am minded to do, that you may have better understanding of them in the future than you would seem to have had in the past. Time was when the friars were most holy and worthy men, but those who today take the name and claim the reputation of friars have naught of the friar save only the habit. Nay, they have not even that, for whereas their founders ordained that their habits should be straight, of a sorry sort, and of coarse stuff, apt symbols of a soul, that in arraying the body in so mean a garb did despite to all things temporal, our modern friars will have them full, and double, and resplendent, and of the finest stuff, and of a fashion goodly and pontifical, wherein without shame they flaunt it like peacocks in the church, in the piazza, even as do the laity in their robes. And as the fisherman casts his net into the stream with intent to take many fish at one throw, so does the main solicitude and study, art and craft of these friars to embrace and entangle within the ample folds of their vast swelling skirts beguines, widows, and other foolish women, ay, and men likewise in great number. Wherefore, to speak with more exactitude, the friars of today have naught of the habit of the friar, save only the colour thereof. And whereas the friars of old time sought to win men to their salvation, those of today seek to win their women and their wealth. Wherefore they have made it and make it their sole concern by declamation and imagery to strike terror into the souls of fools, and to make believe that sins are purged by alms and masses, to the end that they, base wretches that have fled to friarage not to ensue holiness but to escape hardship, may receive from this man bread, from that man wine, and from the other man a donation for masses for the souls of his dead. True indeed it is that sins are purged by almsgiving and prayer, but did they who give the alms know, did they but understand to whom, or throw them to so many pigs? And knowing that the fewer be they that share great riches, the greater their ease, 'tis the study of each how best by declamation and intimidation to oust others from that whereof he would fain be the sole owner. They censure lust in men, that they turning therefrom, the sole use of their women may remain to the censors. They condemn usury and unlawful gains, that, being entrusted with the restitution thereof, they may be able to enlarge their habits, and to purchase bishoprics and other great preferments with the very money which they have made believe must bring its possessor to perdition. And when they are taxed with these and many other discreditable practices, they deem that there is no censure, however grave, of which they may not be quit by their glib formula, "Follow our precepts, not our practice," as if it were possible that the sheep should be of a more austere and rigid virtue than the shepherds. And how many of these, whom they put off with this formula, understand it not in the way in which they enunciate it, not a few of them know. The friars of today would have you follow their precepts, that is to say, they would have you fill their purses with coin, confide to them your secrets, practice continence, be long-suffering, forgive those that trespass against you, keep yourselves from evil speaking, all which things are good, seemly, holy. But to what end? To the end that they may be able to do that which, if the laity do it, they will not be able to do. Who knows not that idleness cannot subsist without money? Spend thy money on thy pleasures, and the friar will not be able to live in sloth in his order. Go after women, and there will be no place for the friar. Be not long-suffering, pardon not the wrongdoer, and the friar will not dare to cross thy threshold to corrupt thy family. But wherefore pursue I the topic through every detail? They accuse themselves as often as they so excuse themselves in the hearing of all that have understanding. Why seclude they not themselves, if they misdoubt their power to lead continent and holy lives? Or, if they must needs not live as recluses, why follow they not that other holy text of the gospel, Christ began to do and to teach? Let them practice first, and school us with their precepts afterwards. 1,000 such have I seen in my day, admirers, lovers, philanderers, not of ladies of the world alone, but of nuns, ay, and they too such as made the most noise in the pulpit. Is it such as they that we are to follow? He that does so pleases himself, but God knows if he do wisely. But assume that herein we must allow that your censor, the friar, spoke truth, to wit, that none may break the marriage vow without very grave sin. What then? To rob a man, to slay him, to make of him an exile and a wanderer on the face of the earth, are not these yet greater sins? None will deny that so they are. A woman that indulges herself in the intimate use with a man commits but a sin of nature, but if she rob him, or slay him, or drive him out into exile, her sin proceeds from depravity of spirit. That you did rob Tedaldo, I have already shown you, in that, having of your own free will become his, you reft you from him. I now go further and say that, so far as in you lay, you slew him, seeing that, showing yourself ever more and more cruel, you did your utmost to drive him to take his own life, and in the law's intent he that is the cause that wrong is done is as culpable as he that does it. Nor is it deniable that you were the cause that for 7 years he has been an exile and a wanderer upon the face of the earth. Wherefore upon each of the said 3 articles you are found guilty of a greater crime than you committed by your intimacy with him. But consider we the matter more closely. Perchance Tedaldo merited such treatment? Nay, but assuredly it was not so. You have yourself so confessed. Besides which, I know that he loves you more dearly than himself. He would laud, he would extol, he would magnify you above all other ladies, so as never was heard the like, wheresoever 'twas seemly for him to speak of you, and it might be done without exciting suspicion. All his bliss, all his honour, all his liberty he avowed was entirely in your disposal. Was he not of noble birth? And for beauty might he not compare with the rest of his townsfolk? Did he not excel in all the exercises and accomplishments proper to youth? Was he not beloved, held dear, well seen of all men? You will not deny it. How then could you, at the behest of a paltry friar, silly, brutish, and envious, bring yourself to deal with him in any harsh sort? I cannot estimate the error of those ladies who look askance on men and hold them cheap; whereas, bethinking them of what they are themselves, and what and how great is the nobility with which God has endowed man above all the other animals, they ought rather to glory in the love which men give them, and hold them most dear, and with all zeal study to please them, that so their love may never fail. In what sort you did so, instigated by the chatter of a friar, some broth-guzzling, pastry-gorging knave without a doubt, you know, and peradventure his purpose was but to install himself in the place whence he sought to oust another. This then is the sin which the divine justice, which, ever operative, suffers no perturbation of its even balance, or arrest of judgment, has decreed not to leave unpunished. Wherefore, as without due cause you devised how you might despoil Tedaldo of yourself, so without due cause your husband has been placed, and is in jeopardy of his life, on Tedaldo's account, and to your sore affliction. Wherefrom if you would be delivered, there is that which you must promise, ay, and, much more, which you must perform. To wit, that, should it ever betide that Tedaldo return hither from his long exile, you will restore him your favour, your love, your tender regard, your intimacy, and reinstate him in the position which he held before you foolishly hearkened to the half-witted friar. Thus ended the pilgrim, and the lady, who had followed him with the closest attention, deeming all that he advanced very sound, and doubting not that her tribulation was, as he said, in requital of her sin, spoke thus: "Friend of God, well I wot that the matters which you discourse are true, and, thanks to your delineation, I now in great measure know what manner of men are the friars, whom I have hitherto regarded as all alike holy, nor doubt I that great was my fault in the course which I pursued towards Tedaldo. And gladly, were it in my power, would I make reparation in the manner which you have indicated. But how is this feasible? Tedaldo can never return to us. He is dead, wherefore I know not why I must needs give you a promise which cannot be performed." "Madam," returned the pilgrim, "'tis revealed to me by God that Tedaldo is by no means dead, but alive and well and happy, so only he enjoyed your favour." "Nay, but," said the lady, "speak advisedly. I saw his body done to death by more than one knife wound. I folded it in these arms, and drenched the dead face with many a tear, whereby perchance I gave occasion for the bruit that has been made to my disadvantage." "Say what you may, madam," rejoined the pilgrim, "I assure you that Tedaldo lives, and if you will but give the promise, then, for its fulfilment, I have good hope that you will soon see him." Whereupon, "I give the promise," said the lady, "and right gladly will I make it good, nor is there aught that might happen that would yield me such delight as to see my husband free and scathless and Tebaldo alive." Tebaldo now deemed it wise to make himself known, and establish the lady in a more sure hope of her husband's safety. Wherefore he said, "Madam, to set your mind at ease in regard of your husband, I must first impart to you a secret, which be mindful to disclose to none so long as you live." Then, for such was the confidence which the lady reposed in the pilgrim's apparent sanctity, that they were by themselves in a place remote from observation, Tebaldo drew forth a ring which he had guarded with the most jealous care, since it had been given him by the lady on the last night when they were together, and said as he showed it to her, "Madam, know you this?" The lady recognized it forthwith, and answered, "I do, sir, I gave it long ago to Tebaldo." Then the pilgrim, rising and throwing off his sclavine and hat, said with a Florentine accent, "And know you me?" The lady, recognizing forthwith the form and semblance of Tebaldo, was struck dumb with wonder and fear as of a corpse that is seen to go about as if alive, and was much rather disposed to turn and flee from Tebaldo returned from the tomb, than to come forward and welcome Tebaldo arrived from Cyprus. But when Tebaldo said to her, "Fear not, madam, your Tebaldo am I, alive and well, nor was I ever dead, whatever you and my brothers may think," the lady, partly awed, partly reassured by his voice, regarded him with rather more attention, and inly affirming that 'twas in very truth Tebaldo, threw herself upon his neck and wept and kissed him, saying, "Sweet my Tebaldo, welcome home." "Madam," replied Tebaldo, after he had kissed and embraced her, "time serves not now for greetings more intimate. 'Tis for me to be up and doing, that Aldobrandino may be restored to you safe and sound; touching which matter you will, I trust, before tomorrow at even hear tidings that will gladden your heart. Indeed I expect to have good news tonight, and if so, will come and tell it you, when I shall be less straitened than I am at present." He then resumed his sclavine and hat, and having kissed the lady again, and bade her be of good cheer, took his leave, and hied him to the prison, where Aldobrandino lay more occupied with apprehension of imminent death than hope of deliverance to come. As ministrant of consolation he gained ready admittance of the warders, and, seating himself by Aldobrandino's side, he said, "Aldobrandino, in me thou seest a friend sent thee by God, who is touched with pity of thee by reason of thy innocence. Wherefore, if in reverent submission to him thou wilt grant me a slight favour that I shall ask of thee, without fail before tomorrow at even thou shalt, in lieu of the doom of death that thou awaitest, hear thy acquittal pronounced." "Worthy man," replied Aldobrandino, "I know thee not, nor mind I ever to have seen thee. Wherefore, as thou showest thyself solicitous for my safety, my friend indeed thou must needs be, even as thou sayest. And in sooth the crime for which they say I ought to be doomed to death, I never committed, though others enough I have committed, which perchance have brought me to this extremity. However, if so be that God has now pity on me, this I tell thee in reverent submission to him, that, whereas 'tis but a little thing that thou cravest of me, there is naught, however great, but I would not only promise, but gladly do it. Wherefore, even ask what thou wilt, and if so be that I escape, I will without fail keep my word to the letter." "Nay," returned the pilgrim, "I ask but this of thee, that thou pardon Tebaldo's 4 brothers, that in the belief that thou wast guilty of their brother's death they brought thee to this strait, and, so they ask thy forgiveness, account them as thy brothers and friends." "How sweet," replied Aldobrandino, "is the savour, how ardent the desire of vengeance, none knows but he that is wronged; but yet, so God may take thought for my deliverance, I will gladly pardon, nay, I do now pardon them, and if I go hence alive and free, I will thenceforth have them in such regard as shall content thee." Satisfied with this answer, the pilgrim, without further parley, heartily exhorted Aldobrandino to be of good cheer, assuring him that, before the next day was done, he should be certified beyond all manner of doubt of his deliverance. And so he left him. On quitting the prison, the pilgrim hied him forthwith to the Signory, and being closeted with the knight that was in charge, thus spoke: "My lord, 'tis the duty of all, and most especially of those who hold your place, zealously to bestir themselves that the truth be brought to light, in order as well that those bear not the penalty who have not committed the crime, as that the guilty be punished. And that this may come to pass to your honour and the undoing of the delinquent, I am come hither to you. You wot that you have dealt rigorously with Aldobrandino Palermini, and have found, as you think, that 'twas he that slew Tebaldo Elisei, and you are about to condemn him, wherein you are most certainly in error, as I doubt not before midnight to prove to you, delivering the murderers into your hands." The worthy knight, who was not without pity for Aldobrandino, readily gave ear to the pilgrim's words. He conversed at large with him, and availing himself of his guidance, made an easy capture of the two brothers that kept the inn and their servant in their first sleep. He was about to put them to the torture to elicit the true state of the case, when, their courage failing, they confessed without the least reserve, severally at first and then jointly, that 'twas they that had slain Tebaldo Elisei, not knowing who he was. Asked for why, they answered that 'twas because he had sorely harassed the wife of one of them, and would have constrained her to do his pleasure while they were out of doors. Whereof the pilgrim was no sooner apprized than by leave of the knight he withdrew, and hied him privily to the house of Madonna Ermelina, whom, the rest of the household being gone to bed, he found awaiting him alone, and equally anxious for good news of her husband and a complete reconciliation with her Tebaldo. On entering, he blithely exclaimed, "Rejoice, dearest my lady, for thou mayst rest assured that tomorrow thou shalt have thy Aldobrandino back here safe and sound." And to confirm her faith in his words, he told her all that he had done. Greater joy was never woman's than hers of two such glad surprises, to wit, to have Tebaldo with her alive again, whom she had wailed for verily dead, and to know Aldobrandino, whom she had thought in no long time to wail for dead, now out of jeopardy. Wherefore, when she had affectionately embraced and kissed her Tebaldo, they hied them to bed together, and with hearty good will made gracious and gladsome consummation of their peace by interchange of sweet solace. With the approach of day, Tebaldo rose, and having first apprized the lady of his purpose and enjoined her, as before, to keep it most secret, resumed his pilgrim's habit and sallied forth of her house, to be ready, as occasion should serve, to act in Aldobrandino's interest. As soon as 'twas day, the Signory, deeming themselves amply conversant with the affair, set Aldobrandino at large, and a few days later they caused the malefactors to be beheaded in the place where they had done the murder. Great was Aldobrandino's joy to find himself free, nor less great was that of his lady and all his friends and kinsfolk, and as 'twas through the pilgrim that it had come about, they brought him to their house, there to reside as long as he cared to tarry in the city, nor could they do him honour and cheer enough, and most of all the lady, who knew her man. But after a while, seeing that his brothers were not only become a common laughing-stock by reason of Aldobrandino's acquittal, but had armed themselves for very fear, he felt that their reconciliation with him brooked no delay, and accordingly craved of him performance of his promise. Aldobrandino replied handsomely that it should be had at once. The pilgrim then bade him arrange for the following day a grand banquet, at which he and his kinsfolk and their ladies were to entertain the four brothers and their ladies, adding that he would himself go forthwith as Aldobrandino's envoy and bid them welcome to his peace and banquet. All which being approved by Aldobrandino, the pilgrim hied him with all speed to the four brothers, whom by ample, apt, and unanswerable argument he readily induced to reinstate themselves in Aldobrandino's friendship by suing for his forgiveness. Which done, he bade them and their ladies to breakfast with Aldobrandino on the morrow, and they, being assured of his good faith, were consenting to come. So on the morrow, at the breakfast hour, Tebaldo's four brothers, still wearing their black, came with certain of their friends to Aldobrandino's house, where he awaited them, and in presence of the company that had been bidden to meet them, laid down their arms and made surrender to Aldobrandino, asking his pardon of that which they had done against him. Aldobrandino received them compassionately, wept, kissed each on the mouth, and let few words suffice to remit each offence. After them came their sisters and their wives, all habited sadly, and were graciously received by Madonna Ermelina and the other ladies. The guests, men and women alike, found all things ordered at the banquet with magnificence, nor aught unmeet for commendation, save the restraint which the yet recent grief, betokened by the sombre garb of Tidaldo's kinsfolk, laid upon speech, wherein some had found matter to except against the banquet and the pilgrim for devising it, as he well knew. But, as he had premeditated, in due time he stood up, the others being occupied with their dessert, and spoke thus: "Nothing is wanting to complete the gaiety of this banquet except the presence of Tidaldo, whom, as you have been long time with him and have not known him, I will point out to you." So, having divested himself of his clavine and whatever else in his garb denoted the pilgrim, he remained habited in a tunic of green taffeta, in which guise so great was the wonder with which all regarded him that, though they recognized him, 'twas long before any dared to believe that 'twas actually Tidaldo. Marking their surprise, Tidaldo told them not a little about themselves, their family connections, their recent history, and his own adventures. Whereat his brothers and the rest of the men, all weeping for joy, hasted to embrace him, followed by the women, as well those that were not, as those that were, of kin to him, save only Madonna Ermelina. Which Aldobrandino observing, said, "What is this, Ermelina? How comes it that, unlike the other ladies, thou alone dost Tidaldo no cheer?" "Cheer," replied the lady in the hearing of all, "would I gladly do him such as no other woman has done or could do, seeing that I am more beholden to him than any other woman, in that to him I owe it that I have thee with me again. 'Tis but the words spoken to my disadvantage, while we mourned him that we deemed Tidaldo, that give me pause." "Now out upon thee," said Aldobrandino. "Think'st thou that I heed the yelping of these curs? His zeal for my deliverance has abundantly disproved it, besides which I never believed it. Quick, get thee up, and go and embrace him." The lady, who desired nothing better, was in this not slow to obey her husband. She rose forthwith, and embraced Tidaldo as the other ladies had done, and did him gladsome cheer. Tidaldo's brothers and all the company, men and women alike, heartily approved Aldobrandino's handsomeness, and so whatever of despite the rumour had engendered in the minds of any was done away. And now that all had done him cheer, Tidaldo with his own hands rent his brothers' suits of black upon their backs, as also the sad-hued garments which his sisters and sisters-in-law wore, and bade bring other apparel. Which when they had donned, there was no lack of singing, dancing, and other sorts of merrymaking, whereby the banquet, for all its subdued beginning, had a sonorous close. Then, just as they were, in the blithest of spirits, they hied them all to Tidaldo's house, where in the evening they supped, and in this manner they held festival for several days. 'Twas some time before the Florentines ceased to look on Tidaldo as a portent, as if he were risen from the dead, and the shadow of doubt whether he were really Tidaldo or no continued to lurk in the minds of not a few, including even his brothers. They had no assured belief, and in that frame had perchance long continued, but for a casual occurrence that showed them who the murdered man was. It so befell that one day some men-at-arms from Lunigiana passed by their house, and seeing Tidaldo, accosted him, saying, "Good morrow to thee, fagiolo." To whom Tidaldo, in the presence of his brothers, answered, "You take me for another." Whereat they were abashed, and asked his pardon, saying, "Sooth to tell, you are liker than we ever knew any man like to another, to a comrade of ours, Fasuolo da Pontremoli by name, who came hither a fortnight ago, or perhaps a little more, since when we have not been able to learn what became of him. Most true it is that your dress surprised us, because he, like ourselves, was a soldier." Whereupon Tidaldo's eldest brother came forward, and asked how their comrade had been accoutred. They told him, and 'twas found to have been exactly as they said, by which and other evidence 'twas established that 'twas Fasuolo that had been murdered, and not Tidaldo, of whom thenceforth no suspicion lurked in the minds of his brothers or anyone else. So, then, Tebaldo returned home very rich, and remained constant in his love, nor did the lady again treat him harshly; but, using discretion, they long had mutual solace of their love. God grant us solace of ours. End of Day 3, the 7th story.
Day 3, the 8th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Philippa Jevons. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 8th story. Ferrando, having taken a certain powder, is interred for dead, is disinterred by the abbot, who enjoys his wife, is put in prison and taught to believe that he is in purgatory, is then resuscitated, and rears as his own a boy begotten by the abbot upon his wife.
Ended Emilia's long story, which to none was the less pleasing for its length, but was deemed of all the ladies brief in regard of the number and variety of the events therein recounted. A gesture of the queen's sufficed to convey her behest to Lauretta, and cause her thus to begin.
Dearest ladies, I have it in mind to tell you a true story, which wears far more of the aspect of a lie than of that which it really was. It is brought to my recollection by that which we have heard of one being bewailed and buried in lieu of another. My story, then, is of one that, living, was buried for dead, and after believed with many others that he came out of the tomb, not as one that had not died, but as one risen from the dead, whereby he was venerated as a saint, who ought rather to have been condemned as a criminal. Know then that there was, and still is, in Tuscany, an abbey, situate, as we see not a few, in a somewhat solitary spot, wherein the office of abbot was held by a monk, who in all other matters ordered his life with great sanctity, save only in the commerce with women, and therein knew so well how to cloak his indulgence, that scarce any there were that so much as suspected, not to say detected it, so holy and just was he reputed in all matters. Now the abbot consorted much with a very wealthy contadino, Ferrando by name, a man coarse and gross beyond measure, whose friendship the abbot only cared for because of the opportunities which it afforded of deriving amusement from his simplicity; and during their intercourse the abbot discovered that Ferrando had a most beautiful wife, of whom he became so hotly enamoured that he could think of naught else either by day or by night. But learning that, however simple and inept in all other matters, Ferrando showed excellent good sense in cherishing and watching over this wife of his, he almost despaired. However, being very astute, he prevailed so far with Ferrando that he would sometimes bring his wife with him to take a little recreation in the abbey garden, where he discoursed to them with all lowliness of the blessedness of life eternal, and the most pious works of many men and women of times past, insomuch that the lady conceived a desire to confess to him, and craved and had Ferrando's leave therefore. So, to the abbot's boundless delight, the lady came and seated herself at his feet to make her confession, whereto she prefixed the following exordium: "If God, sir, had given me a husband, or had not permitted me to have one, perchance 'twould be easy for me under your guidance to enter the way of which you have spoken, that leads to life eternal. But considering what manner of man Ferrando is, and his stupidity, I may call myself a widow while yet I am married, in that so long as he lives I may have no other husband, and he, fool that he is without the least cause so inordinately jealous of me, that 'tis not possible but that my life with him be one of perpetual tribulation and woe. Wherefore, before I address myself to make further confession, I in all humility beseech you to be pleased to give me some counsel of this matter, for here or nowhere is to be found the source of the amelioration of my life, and if it be not found, neither confession nor any other good work will be of any avail." The abbot was overjoyed to hear her thus speak, deeming that fortune had opened a way to the fulfilment of his heart's desire. Wherefore he said, "My daughter, I doubt not that 'tis a great affliction to a lady, fair and delicate as you are, to have a fool for a husband, and still more so that he should be jealous; and as your husband is both the one and the other, I readily credit what you say of your tribulation. But, to come to the point, I see no resource or remedy in this case, save only this, that Ferrando be cured of his jealousy. The medicine that shall cure him I know very well how to devise, but it behoves you to keep secret what I am about to tell you." "Doubt not of it, my father," said the lady, "for I had rather suffer death than tell any aught that you forbade me to tell. But the medicine, how is it to be devised?" "If we would have him cured," replied the abbot, "it can only be by his going to purgatory." "And how may that be?" returned the lady. "Can he go thither while he yet lives?" "He must die," answered the abbot, "and so he will go thither; and when he has suffered pain enough to be cured of his jealousy, we have certain prayers with which we will supplicate God to restore him to life, and he will do so." "Then," said the lady, "am I to remain a widow?" "Yes," replied the abbot, "for a certain time, during which you must be very careful not to let yourself be married to another, because 'twould offend God, and when Ferrando was restored to life, you would have to go back to him, and he would be more jealous than ever." "Be it so then," said the lady, "if he be but cured of his jealousy, and so I be not doomed to pass the rest of my days in prison, I shall be content. Do as ye think best." "And so will I," said the abbot. "But what reward shall I have for such a service?" "My father," said the lady, "what you please, so only it be in my power. But what may the like of me do that may be acceptable to a man such as you?" "Madam," replied the abbot, "'tis in your power to do no less for me than I am about to do for you. As that which I am minded to do will ensure your comfort and consolation, so there is that which you may do which will be the deliverance and salvation of my life." "If it be so," said the lady, "I shall not be found wanting." "In that case," said the abbot, "you will give me your love, and gratify my passion for you, with which I am all afire, and wasting away." Whereto the lady, all consternation, replied, "Alas, my father, what is this you crave? I took you for a holy man. Now does it beseem holy men to make such overtures to ladies that come to them for counsel?" "Marvel not, fair my soul," returned the abbot. "Hereby is my holiness in no wise diminished, for holiness resides in the soul, and this which I ask of you is but a sin of the flesh. But however it may be, such is the might of your bewitching beauty, that love constrains me thus to act. And let me tell you, good cause have you to vaunt you of your beauty more than other women, in that it delights the saints, who are used to contemplate celestial beauties. Whereto I may add, that, albeit I am an abbot, yet I am a man, even as others, and, as you see, not yet old. Nor need this matter seem formidable to you, but rather to be anticipated with pleasure. For while Ferrando is in purgatory, I shall be your nightly companion, and will give you such solace as he should have given you. Nor will it ever be discovered by any, for all think of me, even as you did a while ago, or even more so. Reject not the grace that God accords you, for 'tis in your power to have, and, if you are wise and follow my advice, you shall have that which women not a few desire in vain to have. And moreover I have jewels fair and rare, which I am minded shall be yours and none others. Wherefore, sweet my hope, deny me not due guerdon of the service which I gladly render you." The lady, her eyes still downcast, knew not how to deny him, and yet scrupled to gratify him. Wherefore the abbot, seeing that she had hearkened and hesitated to answer, deemed that she was already half won, and, following up what he had said with much more to the like effect, did not rest until he had persuaded her that she would do well to comply; and so with some confusion she told him that she was ready to obey his every behest, but it might not be until Ferrando was in purgatory. The abbot, well content, replied, "And we will send him thither forthwith. Do but arrange that he come hither to stay with me to-morrow or the day after." Which said, he slipped a most beautiful ring on her finger, and dismissed her. Pleased with the gift, and expecting more to come, the lady rejoined her attendants, with whom she forthwith fell a talking marvellous things of the abbot's sanctity, and so went home with them. Some few days after, Ferrando being come to the abbey, the abbot no sooner saw him than he resolved to send him to purgatory. So he selected from among his drugs a powder of marvellous virtue, which he had gotten in the Levant from a great prince, who averred that 'twas wont to be used by the old man of the mountain, when he would send any one to or bring him from his paradise, and that, without doing the recipient any harm, 'twould induce in him, according to the quantity of the dose, a sleep of such duration and quality, that while the efficacy of the powder lasted, none would deem him to be alive. Whereof he took enough to cause a 3 days' sleep, and gave it to Ferrando in his cell, in a beaker that had still some wine in it, so that he drank it unwittingly. After which he took Ferrando to the cloister, and there with some of his monks fell to making merry with him and his ineptitudes. In no long time, however, the powder so wrought that Ferrando was seized in the head with a fit of somnolence so sudden and violent, that he slept as he stood, and sleeping fell to the ground. The abbot put on an agitated air, caused him to be untrussed, sent for cold water and had it sprinkled on his face, and applied such other remedies as if he would fain call back life and sense banished by vapours of the stomach or some other intrusive force. But as, for all that he and his monks did, Ferrando did not revive, they, after feeling his pulse and finding there no sign of life, one and all pronounced him certainly dead. Wherefore they sent word to his wife and kinsfolk, who came forthwith and mourned a while; after which Ferrando in his clothes was by the abbot's order laid in a tomb. The lady went home, saying that nothing should ever part her from a little son that she had borne Ferrando, and so she occupied herself with the care of her son and Ferrando's estate. At night the abbot rose noiselessly, and with the help of a Bolognese monk, in whom he reposed much trust, and who was that very day arrived from Bologna, got Ferrando out of the tomb, and bore him to a vault which admitted no light, having been made to serve as a prison for delinquent monks; and having stripped him of his clothes, and habited him as a monk, they laid him on a truss of straw, and left him there until he should revive. Expecting which event, and instructed by the abbot how he was then to act, the Bolognese monk, none else knowing aught of what was afoot, kept watch by the tomb. The day after, the abbot with some of his monks paid a pastoral visit to the lady's house, where he found her in mourning weeds and sad at heart, and after administering a little consolation, he gently asked her to redeem her promise. Free as she now felt herself, and hampered neither by Ferrando nor by any other, the lady, who had noticed another beautiful ring on the abbot's finger, promised immediate compliance, and arranged with the abbot that he should visit her the very next night. So at nightfall the abbot donned Ferrando's clothes, and, attended by his monk, paid his visit, and lay with her until matins, to his immense delight and solace, and so returned to the abbey. And many visits he paid her on the same errand, whereby some that met him, coming or going that way, supposed that 'twas Ferrando perambulating those parts by way of penance, and fables not a few passed from mouth to mouth of the foolish rustics, and sometimes reached the ears of the lady, who was at no loss to account for them. As for Ferrando, when he revived, 'twas only to find himself he knew not where, while the Bolognese monk entered the tomb, gibbering horribly, and armed with a rod, wherewith, having laid hold of Ferrando, he gave him a severe thrashing. Blubbering and bellowing for pain, Ferrando could only ejaculate, "Where am I?" "In purgatory," replied the monk. "How?" returned Ferrando. "Am I dead, then?" And the monk assuring him that 'twas even so, he fell a bewailing his own and his lady's and his son's fate after the most ridiculous fashion in the world. the monk brought him somewhat to eat and drink, of which when Ferrando caught sight, "Oh," said he, "dead folk eat, then, do they?" "They do," replied the monk, "and this which I bring thee is what the lady that was thy wife sent this morning to the church by way of alms for masses for thy soul, and God is minded that it be assigned to thee." "Now, God grant her a happy year," said Ferrando. "Dearly I loved her while I yet lived, and would hold her all night long in my arms, and cease not to kiss her, ay, and would do yet more to her when I was so minded." Whereupon he fell to eating and drinking with great avidity, and finding the wine not much to his taste, he said, "Now, God do her a mischief! Why gave she not the priest of the wine that is in the cask by the wall?" When he had done eating, the monk laid hold of him again, and gave him another sound thrashing with the rod. Ferrando bellowed mightily, and then cried out, "Alas! why servest thou me so?" "God," answered the monk, "has decreed that thou be so served twice a day." "For why?" said Ferrando. "Because," returned the monk, "thou wast jealous, notwithstanding thou hadst to wife a woman that has not her peer in thy countryside." "Alas!" said Ferrando, "she was indeed all that thou sayest. Ay, and the sweetest creature too, no comfit so honeyed. But I knew not that God took it amiss that a man should be jealous, or I had not been so." "Of that," replied the monk, "thou shouldst have bethought thee while thou wast there, and have amended thy ways, and should it fall to thy lot ever to return thither, be sure that thou so lay to heart the lesson that I now give thee, that thou be no more jealous." "Oh," said Ferrando, "dead folk sometimes return to earth, do they?" "They do," replied the monk, "if God so will." "Oh," said Ferrando, "if I ever return, I will be the best husband in the world. Never will I beat her or scold her, save for the wine that she has sent me this morning, and also for sending me never a candle, so that I have had perforce to eat in the dark." "Nay," said the monk, "she sent them, but they were burned at the masses." "Oh," said Ferrando, "I doubt not you say true, and of a surety, if I ever return, I will let her do just as she likes. But tell me, who art thou that entreatest me thus?" "Late of Sardinia, I," answered the monk, "dead too, and for that I gave my lord much countenance in his jealousy, doomed by God for my proper penance to entreat thee thus with food and drink and thrashings, until such time as he may ordain otherwise, touching thee and me." "And are we two the only folk here?" inquired Ferrando. "Nay, there are thousands beside," answered the monk, "but thou canst neither see nor hear them, nor they thee." "And how far," said Ferrando, "may we be from our country?" "Oho," returned the monk, "why, 'tis some miles clean out of shit range." "I'faith," said Ferrando, "that is far indeed. Methinks we must be out of the world." In such a course, alternately beaten, fed, and amused with idle tales, was Ferrando kept for 10 months, while the abbot, to his great felicity, paid many a visit to the fair lady, and had the jolliest time in the world with her. But, as misfortunes will happen, the lady conceived, which fact, as soon as she was aware of it, she imparted to the abbot, whereupon both agreed that Ferrando must without delay be brought back from purgatory to earth and her, and be given to understand that she was with child of him. So the very next night the abbot went to the prison, and in a disguised voice pronounced Ferrando's name, and said to him, "Ferrando, be of good cheer, for God is minded that thou return to earth, and on thy return thou shalt have a son by thy lady, and thou shalt call him Benedetto, because 'tis in answer to the prayers of thy holy abbot and thy lady, and for love of Saint Benedict, that God accords thee this grace. Whereat Ferrando was overjoyed, and said, It likes me well. God give a good year to Master Lord God, and the abbot, and St. Benedict, and my cheese-powdered, honey-sweet wife. Then, in the wine that he sent him, the abbot administered enough of the powder to cause him to sleep for 4 hours, and so, with the aid of the monk, having first habited him in his proper clothes, he privily conveyed him back to the tomb in which he had been buried. On the morrow at daybreak Ferrando revived, and perceiving through a chink in the tomb a glimmer of light, to which he had been a stranger for full 10 months, he knew that he was alive, and began to bellow, "Let me out! Let me out!" Then, setting his head to the lid of the tomb, he heaved amain, whereby the lid, being insecure, started, and he was already thrusting it aside, when the monks, matins being now ended, ran to the spot, and recognized Ferrando's voice, and saw him issue from the tomb; by which unwonted event they were all so affrighted that they took to flight, and hied them to the abbot, who, rising as if from prayer, said, "Sons, be not afraid. Take the cross and the holy water, and follow me, and let us see what sign of his might God will vouchsafe us." And so he led the way to the tomb, beside which they found Ferrando standing, deathly pale by reason of his long estrangement from the light. On sight of the abbot he ran and threw himself at his feet, saying, "My father, it has been revealed to me that 'tis to your prayers, and those of St. Benedict and my lady, that I owe my release from purgatorial pain, and restoration to life. Wherefore 'tis my prayer that God give you a good year and good calends to-day and all days." "Laud we the power of God," said the abbot. "Go then, son, as God has restored thee to earth, comfort thy wife, who, since thou didst depart this life, has been ever in tears, and mayst thou live henceforth in the love and service of God." "Sir," answered Ferrando, "'tis well said, and, for the doing, trust me that as soon as I find her, I shall kiss her, such is the love I bear her." So saying, he went his way, and the abbot, left alone with his monks, made as if he marvelled greatly at the affair, and caused devoutly chant the Miserere. So Ferrando returned to his hamlet, where all that saw him fleeing, as folk are wont to flee from spectacles of horror, he called them back, asseverating that he was risen from the tomb. His wife at first was no less timorous, but as folk began to take heart of grace, perceiving that he was alive, they plied him with many questions, all which he answered as one that had returned with ripe experience, and gave them tidings of the souls of their kinsfolk, and told of his own invention the prettiest fables of the purgatorial state, and in full folk moot recounted the revelation vouchsafed him by the mouth of Ragnolo Brachiello before his resuscitation. Thus was Ferrando reinstated in his property, and reunited to his wife, who, being pregnant, as he thought by himself, chanced by the time of her delivery to countenance the vulgar error that the woman must bear the infant in the womb for exactly 9 months, and gave birth to a male child, who was named Benedetto Ferrondi. Ferrando's return from purgatory, and the report he brought thence, immeasurably enhanced the fame of the abbot's holiness. So Ferrando, cured of his jealousy by the thrashings which he had gotten for it, verified the abbot's prediction, and never offended the lady again in that sort. Wherefore she lived with him, as before, in all outward seemliness, albeit she failed not, as occasion served, to foregather with the holy abbot, who had so well and sedulously served her in her especial need. End of Day 3, the 8th story.
Day 3, the 9th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ruth Golding. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the 9th story. Gilette of Narbonne cures the King of France of a fistula, craves for spouse Bertrand Roussillon, who marries her against his will, and hies him in despite to Florence, where, as he courts a young woman, Gilette lies with him in her stead, and has 2 sons by him; for which cause he afterwards takes her into favour, and entreats her as his wife.
Lauretta's story being ended, and the queen being minded not to break her engagement with Dioneo, it was now her turn to speak; wherefore, without awaiting the call of her subjects, thus with mien most gracious she began.
Now that we have heard Lauretta's story, who shall tell any to compare with it for beauty? Lucky indeed was it that she was not the first, for few that followed would have pleased, and so, I misdoubt me, 'twill fare ill with those that remain to complete the day's narration. However, for what it may be worth, I will tell you a story which seems to me germane to our theme. Know then that in the realm of France there was a gentleman, Isnard, Comte de Roussillon by name, who being in ill health, kept ever in attendance on him a physician, one Master Gérard of Narbonne. The said Count had an only son, named Bertrand, a very fine and winsome little lad, with whom were brought up other children of his own age, among them the said physician's little daughter Gilette, who with a love boundless and ardent out of all keeping with her tender years, became enamoured of this Bertrand. And so when the Count died, and his son, being left a ward of the king, must needs go to Paris, the girl remained beside herself with grief, and, her father dying soon after, would gladly have gone to Paris to see Bertrand, might she but have found a fair excuse. But no decent pretext could she come by, being left a great and sole heiress, and very closely guarded. So, being come of marriageable age, still cherishing Bertrand's memory, she rejected not a few suitors, to whom her kinsfolk would fain have married her, without assigning any reason. Now, her passion waxing ever more ardent for Bertrand, as she learned that he was grown a most goodly gallant, tidings reached her that the King of France, in consequence of a tumour which he had had in the breast, and which had been ill tended, was now troubled with a fistula, which occasioned him extreme distress and suffering. Nor had he as yet come by a physician that was able, though many had essayed, to cure him, but had rather grown worse under their hands. Wherefore, in despair, he was minded no more to have recourse to any for counsel or aid. Whereat the damsel was overjoyed, deeming not only that she might find therein lawful occasion to go to Paris, but that if the disease was what she took it to be, it might well betide that she should be wedded to Bertrand. So, for not a little knowledge had she gotten from her father, she prepared a powder from certain herbs serviceable in the treatment of the supposed disease, and straightway took horse and hied her to Paris. Arrived there, she made it her first concern to have sight of Bertrand, and then, having obtained access to the king, she besought him of his grace to show her his disease. The king knew not how to refuse so young, fair, and winsome a damsel, and let her see the place. Whereupon, no longer doubting that she should cure him, she said, "Sire, so please you, I hope in God to cure you of this malady within 8 days, without causing you the least distress or discomfort." The king only scoffed at her words, saying to himself, "How should a damsel have come by a knowledge and skill that the greatest physicians in the world do not possess?" He therefore graciously acknowledged her good intention, and answered that he had resolved no more to follow advice of physician. "Sire," said the damsel, "you disdain my art because I am young and a woman. But I bid you bear in mind that I rely not on my own skill, but on the help of God and the skill of Master Gérard of Narbonne, my father, and a famous physician in his day." Whereupon the king said to himself, perchance she is sent me by God. Why put I not her skill to the proof, seeing that she says she can cure me in a short time, and cause me no distress?" And being minded to make the experiment, he said, "Damsel, and if, having caused me to cancel my resolve, you should fail to cure me, what are you content should ensue?" "Sire," answered the damsel, "set a guard upon me, and if within 8 days I cure you not, have me burned. But if I cure you, what shall be my guerdon?" "You seem," said the king, "to be yet unmarried. If you shall effect the cure, we will marry you well and in high place." "Sire," returned the damsel, "well content indeed am I that you should marry me, so it be to such a husband as I shall ask of you, save that I may not ask any of your sons, or any other member of the royal house." Whereto the king forthwith consented, and the damsel, thereupon applying her treatment, restored him to health before the period assigned. Wherefore, as soon as the king knew that he was cured, "Damsel," said he, "well have you won your husband." She answered, "In that case, sire, I have won Bertrand de Roussillon, of whom, while yet a child, I was enamoured, and whom I have ever since most ardently loved." To give her Bertrand seemed to the king no small matter, but having pledged his word, he would not break it. So he sent for Bertrand and said to him, "Bertrand, you are now come to man's estate, and fully equipped to enter on it. 'Tis therefore our will that you go back and assume the governance of your county, and that you take with you a damsel whom we have given you to wife." "And who is the damsel, sire?" said Bertrand. "She it is," answered the king, "that has restored us to health by her physic." Now Bertrand, knowing Gillette, and that her lineage was not such as matched his nobility, albeit seeing her he had found her very fair, was overcome with disdain, and answered, "So, sire, you would fain give me a she doctor to wife. Now God forbid that I should ever marry any such woman." "Then," said the king, "you would have us fail of the faith which we pledged to the damsel, who asked you in marriage by way of guerdon for our restoration to health." "Sire," said Bertrand, "you may take from me all that I possess, and give me as your man to whomsoever you may be minded, but rest assured that I shall never be satisfied with such a match." "Nay, but you will," replied the king, "for the damsel is fair and discreet, and loves you well; wherefore we anticipate that you will live far more happily with her than with a dame of much higher lineage." Bertrand was silent, and the king made great preparations for the celebration of the nuptials. The appointed day came, and Bertrand, albeit reluctantly, nevertheless complied, and in the presence of the king was wedded to the damsel, who loved him more dearly than herself. Which done, Bertrand, who had already taken his resolution, said that he was minded to go down to his county, there to consummate the marriage. And so, having craved and had leave of absence of the king, he took horse, but instead of returning to his county, he hied him to Tuscany, where, finding the Florentines at war with the Siennese, he determined to take service with the Florentines, and being made heartily and honourably welcome, was appointed to the command of part of their forces at a liberal stipend, and so remained in their service for a long while. Distressed by this turn of fortune, and hoping by her wise management to bring Bertrand back to his county, the bride hied her to Roussillon, where she was received by all the tenants as their liege lady. She found that during the long absence of the lord everything had fallen into decay and disorder, which, being a capable woman, she rectified with great and sedulous care, to the great joy of the tenants, who held her in great esteem and love, and severely censured the count that he was not satisfied with her. When the lady had duly ordered all things in the county, she dispatched 2 knights to the count with the intelligence, praying him that, if 'twas on her account that he came not home, he would so inform her, in which case she would gratify him by departing. To whom with all harshness he replied, she may even please herself in the matter. For my part, I will go home and live with her when she has this ring on her finger, and a son gotten of me upon her arm. The ring was one which he greatly prized, and never removed from his finger, by reason of a virtue which he had been given to understand that it possessed. The knights appreciated the harshness of a condition which contained 2 articles, both of which were all but impossible, and seeing that by no words of theirs could they alter his resolve, they returned to the lady and delivered his message. Sorely distressed, the lady, after long pondering, determined to try how and where the 2 conditions might be satisfied, that so her husband might be hers again. Having formed her plan, she assembled certain of the more considerable and notable men of the county, to whom she gave a consecutive and most touching narrative of all that she had done for love of the Count, with the result; concluding by saying that she was not minded to tarry there to the Count's perpetual exile, but to pass the rest of her days in pilgrimages and pious works for the good of her soul. Wherefore she prayed them to undertake the defence and governance of the county, and to inform the Count that she had made entire and absolute cession of it to him, and was gone away with the intention of never more returning to Roussillon. As she spoke, tears not a few coursed down the cheeks of the honest men, and again they besought her to change her mind and stay. All in vain, however. She commended them to God, and, accompanied only by one of her male cousins and a chambermaid, all 3 habited as pilgrims, and amply provided with money and precious jewels, she took the road, nor tarried until she was arrived at Florence. There she lodged in a little inn kept by a good woman that was a widow, bearing herself lowly as a poor pilgrim, and eagerly expectant of news of her lord. Now it so befell that the very next day she saw Bertrand pass in front of the inn on horseback, at the head of his company; and though she knew him very well, nevertheless she asked the good woman of the inn who he was. The hostess replied, "'Tis a foreign gentleman, Count Bertrand they call him, a very pleasant gentleman, and courteous, and much beloved in this city. And he is in the last degree enamoured of one of our neighbours here, who is a gentlewoman, but in poor circumstances. A very virtuous damsel she is too, and being as yet unmarried by reason of her poverty, she lives with her mother, who is an excellent and most discreet lady, but for whom, perchance, she would before now have yielded and gratified the Count's desire." No word of this was lost on the lady. She pondered and meditated every detail with the closest attention, and having laid it all to heart, took her resolution. She ascertained the names and abode of the lady and her daughter that the Count loved, and hied her one day privily, wearing her pilgrim's weeds, to their house, where she found the lady and her daughter in very evident poverty, and, after greeting them, told the lady that, if it were agreeable to her, she would speak with her. The gentlewoman rose and signified her willingness to listen to what she had to say. So they went into a room by themselves and sat down. And then the Countess began thus: "Madam, methinks you are, as I am, under Fortune's frown, but perchance you have it in your power, if you are so minded, to afford solace to both of us." The lady answered that, so she might honourably find it, solace indeed was what she craved most of all things in the world. Whereupon the Countess continued, "I must first be assured of your faith, wherein if I confide and am deceived, the interests of both of us will suffer." "Have no fear," said the gentlewoman. "Speak your whole mind without reserve, for you will find that there is no deceit in me." So the Countess told who she was, and the whole course of her love affair from its commencement to that hour, on such wise that the gentlewoman, believing her story the more readily that she had already heard it in part from others, was touched with compassion for her. The narrative of her woes complete, the Countess added, "Now that you have heard my misfortunes, you know the two conditions that I must fulfil, if I would come by my husband. Nor know I any other person than you that may enable me to fulfil them. But so you may, if this which I hear is true, to wit, that my husband is in the last degree enamoured of your daughter." "Madam," replied the gentlewoman, "I know not if the Count loves my daughter, but true it is that he makes great show of loving her. But how may this enable me to do aught for you in the matter that you have at heart?" "The how, madam," returned the Countess, "I will shortly explain to you. But you shall first hear what I intend shall ensue if you serve me. Your daughter, I see, is fair and of marriageable age, and by what I have learned and may well understand, 'tis because you have not the wherewith to marry her that you keep her at home. Now, in recompense of the service that you shall do me, I mean to provide her forthwith from my own moneys with such a dowry as you yourself shall deem adequate for her marriage." The lady was too needy not to be gratified by the proposal, but nevertheless, with the true spirit of the gentlewoman, she answered, "Nay, but, madam, tell me that which I may do for you, and if it shall be such as I may honourably do, gladly will I do it, and then you shall do as you may be minded." Said then the Countess, "I require of you that through some one in whom you trust, you send word to the Count, my husband, that your daughter is ready to yield herself entirely to his will, so she may be sure that he loves her, even as he professes, whereof she will never be convinced until he send her the ring which he wears on his finger, and which, she understands, he prizes so much, which being sent you shall give to me, and shall then send him word that your daughter is ready to do his pleasure. And having brought him hither secretly, you shall contrive that I lie by his side instead of your daughter. Perchance by God's grace I shall conceive, and so, having his ring on my finger, and a son gotten of him on my arm, shall have him for my own again, and live with him even as a wife should live with her husband, and owe it all to you." The lady felt that 'twas not a little that the Countess craved of her, for she feared lest it should bring reproach upon her daughter. But she reflected that to aid the good lady to recover her husband was an honourable enterprise, and that in undertaking it she would be subserving a like end. And so, trusting in the good and virtuous disposition of the Countess, she not only promised to do as she was required, but in no long time, proceeding with caution and secrecy as she had been bidden, she both had the ring from the Count, loath though he was to part with it, and cunningly contrived that the Countess should lie with him in place of her daughter, in which first commingling so ardently sought by the Count, it so pleased God that the lady was gotten, as in due time her delivery made manifest, with 2 sons. Nor once only, but many times did the lady gratify the Countess with the embraces of her husband, using such secrecy that no word thereof ever got wind, the Count all the while supposing that he lay, not with his wife, but with her that he loved, and being wont to give her, as he left her in the morning, some fair and rare jewel, which she jealously guarded. When she perceived that she was with child, the Countess, being minded no more to burden the lady with such service, said to her, "Madam, thanks be to God and to you, I now have that which I desired, and therefore 'tis time that I make you grateful requital, and take my leave of you." The lady answered that she was glad if the Countess had gotten aught that gave her joy, but that 'twas not as hoping to have guerdon thereof that she had done her part, but simply because she deemed it meet and her duty so to do. Well said, madam, returned the Countess, and in like manner that which you shall ask of me I shall not give you by way of guerdon, but because I deem it meet and my duty to give it. Whereupon the lady, yielding to necessity and abashed beyond measure, asked of her £100 wherewith to marry her daughter. The Countess, marking her embarrassment and the modesty of her request, gave her £500, besides jewels fair and rare, worth perhaps no less. And having thus much more than contented her, and received her superabundant thanks, she took leave of her, and returned to the inn. The lady, to render purposeless further visits or messages on Bertrand's part, withdrew with her daughter to the house of her kinsfolk in the country. Nor was it long before Bertrand, on the urgent entreaty of his vassals and intelligence of the departure of his wife, quitted Florence and returned home. Greatly elated by this intelligence, the Countess tarried a while in Florence, and was there delivered of 2 sons, as like as possible to their father, whom she nurtured with sedulous care. But by and by she saw fit to take the road, and being come, unrecognised by any, to Montpellier, rested there a few days. And being on the alert for news of the Count and where he was, she learned that on All Saints' Day he was to hold a great reception of ladies and gentlemen at Roussillon, whither, retaining her now wonted pilgrim's weeds, she hied her, and finding that the ladies and gentlemen were all gathered in the Count's palace, and on the point of going to table, she tarried not to change her dress, but went up into the hall, bearing her little ones in her arms, and threading her way through the throng to the place where she saw the Count stand, she threw herself at his feet, and sobbing said to him, "My lord, thy hapless bride am I, who to ensure thy home-coming and abidance in peace have long time been a wanderer, and now demand of thee observance of the condition whereof word was brought me by the 2 knights whom I sent to thee. Lo, in my arms not one son only, but 2 gotten of thee, and on my finger thy ring. 'Tis time, then, that I be received of thee as thy wife, according to thy word." Whereat the Count was all dumbfounded, recognising the ring and his own lineaments in the children, so like were they to him, but saying to himself, nevertheless, "How can it have come about?" So the Countess, while the Count and all that were present marvelled exceedingly, told what had happened, and the manner of it, in precise detail. Wherefore the Count, perceiving that she spoke truth, and having regard to her perseverance and address, and her 2 fine boys, and the wishes of all his vassals and the ladies, who with one accord besought him to own and honour her thenceforth as his lawful bride, laid aside his harsh obduracy, and raised the Countess to her feet, and embraced and kissed her, and acknowledged her for his lawful wife, and the children for his own. Then, having caused her to be rearrayed in garments befitting her rank, he, to the boundless delight of as many as were there, and of all other his vassals, gave up that day, and some that followed, to feasting and merry-making, and did ever thenceforth honour, love, and most tenderly cherish her as his bride and wife. End of Day 3, the 9th story. Recording by Ruth Golding.
Day 3, the 10th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3. The 10th story. Alibech turns hermit, and is taught by Rustico, a monk, how the devil is put in hell. She is afterwards conveyed thence, and becomes the wife of Niebali.
Dioneo, observing that the queen's story, which he had followed with the closest attention, was now ended, and that it only remained for him to speak, waited not to be bidden, but smilingly thus began.
Gracious ladies, perchance you have not yet heard how the devil is put in hell, wherefore, without deviating far from the topic of which you have discoursed throughout the day, I will tell you how 'tis done. It may be that the lesson will prove inspiring, besides which you may learn therefrom that, albeit love prefers the gay palace and the dainty chamber to the rude cabin, yet for all that he may at times manifest his might in wilds matted with forests, rugged with Alps, and desolate with caverns, whereby it may be understood that all things are subject to his sway. But to come to my story, I say that in the city of Capsa in Barbary there was once a very rich man, who, with other children, had a fair and dainty little daughter, Alibech by name. Now Alibech, not being a Christian, and hearing many Christians that were in the city speak much in praise of the Christian faith and the service of God, did one day inquire of one of them after what fashion it were possible to serve God with as few impediments as might be, and was informed that they served God best who most completely renounced the world and its affairs, like those who had fixed their abode in the wilds of the Thebaid desert. Whereupon, actuated by no sober predilection, but by childish impulse, the girl, who was very simple and about 14 years of age, said never a word more of the matter, but stole away on the morrow, and quite alone set out to walk to the Thebaid desert, and by force of resolution, albeit with no small suffering, she after some days reached those wilds, where, espying a cabin a great way off, she hied her thither, and found a holy man by the door, who, marvelling to see her there, asked her what she came there to seek. She answered that, guided by the Spirit of God, she was come thither seeking if haply she might serve him, and also find some one that might teach her how he ought to be served. Marking her youth and great beauty, the worthy man, fearing lest if he suffered her to remain with him he should be ensnared by the devil, commended her good intention, set before her a frugal repast of roots of herbs, crab apples, and dates, with a little water to wash them down, and said to her, "My daughter, there is a holy man not far from here, who is much better able to teach thee that of which thou art in quest than I am. Go to him, therefore." And he showed her the way. But when she was come whither she was directed, she met with the same answer as before, and so, setting forth again, she came at length to the cell of a young hermit, a worthy man, and very devout, his name Rustico, whom she interrogated as she had the others. Rustico, being minded to make severe trial of his constancy, did not send her away as the others had done, but kept her with him in his cell, and when night came, made her a little bed of palm leaves, whereupon he bade her compose herself to sleep. Hardly had she done so before the solicitations of the flesh joined battle with the powers of Rustico's spirit, and he, finding himself left in the lurch by the latter, endured not many assaults before he beat a retreat, and surrendered at discretion, wherefore he bade adieu to holy meditation and prayer and discipline, and fell a musing on the youth and beauty of his companion, and also how he might so order his conversation with her, that without seeming to her to be a libertine, he might yet compass that which he craved of her. So, probing her by certain questions, he discovered that she was as yet entirely without cognizance of man, and as simple as she seemed. Wherefore he excogitated a plan for bringing her to pleasure him under colour of serving God. He began by giving her a long lecture on the great enmity that subsists between God and the devil, after which he gave her to understand that, God having condemned the devil to hell, to put him there was of all services the most acceptable to God. The girl, asking him how it might be done, Rustico answered, "Thou shalt know it in a trice. Thou hast but to do that which thou seest me do." Then, having divested himself of his scanty clothing, he threw himself stark naked on his knees, as if he would pray, whereby he caused the girl, who followed his example, to confront him in the same posture. The following are untranslated.
E così stando, essendo Rustico più che mai nel suo desidero acceso per lo vederla così bella, venne la resurrezione della carne, la quale, riguardando Alibec e maravigliatasi, disse: Rustico, quella che cos'è che io ti veggio, che così si pigna in fuori, e non lo io? Oh, figliuola mia, disse Rustico, questo è il diavolo di che io t'ho parlato, e vedi tu, ora egli mi dà grandissima molestia, tanto che io appena la posso sofferire. Allora disse la giovane, oh, lodato sia Iddio, che io veggio che io sto meglio che non stai tu, che io non ho cotesto diavolo io. Disse Rustico, tu di vero, ma tu hai un'altra cosa, che non la ho io, e haila in iscambio di questo. Disse Alibec, o che? A cui Rustico disse, hai il ninferno, e dicoti che io mi credo che Iddio t'abbia qui mandata per la salute della anima mia, perciò che se questo diavolo pur mi darà questa noia, ove tu vogli aver di me tanta pietà e sofferire che io in inferno il rimetta. Tu mi darai grandissima consolazione e a Dio farai grandissimo piacere e servigio, se tu per quello fari in queste parti venuta a sé. Che tu di? La giovane di buona fede rispose, O padre mio, poscia che io il ninferno sia pure quando vi piacerà. Disse allora Rustico, figliola mia, benedetta sia tu. Andiamo dunque e rimettiamolovi sì che egli poscia mi lasci stare. E così detto, menata la giovane sopra uno dei loro letticelli, le insegnò come star si dovesse a dovere incarcerare quel maledetto da Dio. La giovane, che mai più non aveva in inferno messo diavolo alcuno, per la prima volta sentì un poco di noia, perché ella disse a Rustico, per certo, padre mio, mala cosa dee essere questo diavolo, è veramente nemico di Dio, che ancora all'inferno, non che altrui, duole quando egli vi dentro rimesso. Disse Rustico, figliola, egli non avverrà sempre così. E per fare che questo non avvenisse, da 6 volte, anzi che di su il lieticel si movessero, ve li misero tanto che per quella volta gli trasser sì la superbia del capo, che egli si stette volentieri in pace. Ma ritornatagli poi nel seguente tempo più volte, e la giovane ubbidiente sempre a trargliele si disponesse, avvenne che il giuoco le cominciò a piacere e cominciò a dire a Rustico, ben veggio che il ver dicevano che valentuomini in capsa, che il servire a Dio era così dolce cosa, e per certo io non mi ricordo che mai alcuna altra ne facessi, che di tanto diletto e piacer mi fosse, quanto è il rimettere il diavolo in inferno. E perciò io giudico ogni altra persona che ad altro che a servire a Dio attende essere una bestia. Per la qual cosa essa spesse volte andava a Rustico e gli dicea, Padre mio, io son qui venuta per servire a Dio e non per istare oziosa. Andiamo a rimettere il diavolo in inferno. La qual cosa facendo diceva ella alcuna volta, Rustico, io non so perché il diavolo si sfuga dell'inferno, che se egli vi stesse così volentieri come l'inferno il riceve e tiene, egli non se ne uscirebbe mai. Così adunque, invitando spesso la giovane Rustico, era al servigio di Dio confortandolo, sì la bambaggia del farsetto tratta gli avea, che egli a talora sentiva freddo che un altro sarebbe sudato. E perciò egli incominciò a dire alla giovane che il diavolo non era da castigare né da rimettere in inferno, se non quando egli per superbia levasse il capo. E noi, per grazia di Dio, l'abbiamo sì sgannato, che egli priega Iddio di starsi in pace. E così alquanto impose di silenzio alla giovane, la qual, poi che vide Rustico non la richiedeva a dovere il diavolo rimettere in inferno, gli disse un giorno: Rustico, se il diavolo tuo è gastigato e più non ti dà noia, me il mio inferno non lascia stare, perché tu farai bene che tu col tuo diavolo aiuti a tuttare la rabbia al mio inferno, come io col mio inferno ho aiutato a trarre la superbia del tuo diavolo. Rustico, che di radici d'erba ed acqua viveva, poteva male rispondere alle poste, e dissele che troppi diavoli vorrebbero essere a potere all'inferno attutare, ma che egli ne farebbe ciò che per lui si potesse. E così alcuna volta le soddisfaceva, ma sì era di rado che altro non era che gittare una fava in bocca al leone, di che la giovane, non parendole tanto servire a Dio quanto voleva, mormorava anziché no.
However, the case standing thus, deficiency of power against superfluity of desire between Rustico's devil and Alibec's hell, it chanced that a fire broke out in Capsa, whereby the house of Alibec's father was burned, and he and all his sons and the rest of his household perished, so that Alibec was left sole heiress of all his estate. And a young gallant, Nerbali by name, who by reckless munificence had wasted all his substance, having discovered that she was alive, addressed himself to the pursuit of her, and having found her in time to prevent the confiscation of her father's estate as an esciat for failure of heirs, took her, much to Rustico's relief and against her own will, back to Capsa, and made her his wife, and shared with her her vast patrimony. But before he had lain with her, she was questioned by the ladies of the manner in which she had served God in the desert, whereto she answered that she had been wont to serve him by putting the devil in hell, and that Nerbali had committed a great sin when he took her out of such service. The ladies, being curious to know how the devil was put in hell, the girls satisfied them, partly by words, partly by signs. Whereat they laughed exorbitantly, and still laugh, and said to her, Be not downhearted, daughter, 'tis done here too. Nerbali will know well how to serve God with you in that way. And so, the story passing from mouth to mouth throughout the city, it came at last to be a common proverb, that the most acceptable service that can be rendered to God is to put the devil in hell, which proverb, having travelled hither across the sea, is still current. Wherefore, young ladies, you that have need of the grace of God, see to it that you learn how to put devil in hell, because 'tis mightily pleasing to God, and of great solace to both the parties, and much good may thereby be engendered and ensue. End of Day 3, the 10th story.
Day 3. The conclusion of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by H.M. Rigg. Day the 3rd. The conclusion. 1,000 times or more had Dioneo's story brought the laugh to the lips of the honorable ladies, so quaint and curiously entertaining found they the fashion of it. And now at its close the Queen, seeing the term of her sovereignty come, took the laurel wreath from her head, and with mien most debonair set it on the brow of Philostrato, saying, We shall soon see whether the wolf will know better how to guide the sheep, than the sheep have yet succeeded in guiding the wolves. Whereat Philostrato said with a laugh, "Had I been hearkened to, the wolves would have taught the sheep to put the devil in hell, even as Rustico taught Alibech. Wherefore, call us not wolves, seeing that you have not shown yourselves sheep. However, as best I may be able, I will govern the kingdom committed to my charge." Whereupon Neifile took him up. "Hark ye, Philostrato," she said, "while you thought to teach us, you might have learnt a lesson from us, as did Masetto da Lamporecchio from the nuns, and have recovered your speech when the bones had learned to whistle without a master." Philostrato, perceiving that there was a scythe for each of his arrows, gave up jesting, and addressed himself to the governance of his kingdom. He called the seneschal and held him strictly to account in every particular. He then judiciously ordered all matters as he deemed would be best, and most to the satisfaction of the company, while his sovereignty should last; and having so done, he turned to the ladies and said, "Loving ladies, as my ill luck would have it, since I have had wit to tell good from evil, the charms of one or other of you have kept me ever a slave to love, and for all I shewed myself humble and obedient and conformable, so far as I knew how, to all his ways. My fate has been still the same, to be discarded for another, and go ever from bad to worse, and so I suppose it will be with me to the hour of my death. Wherefore I am minded that tomorrow our discourse be of no other topic than that which is most german to my condition, to wit, of those whose loves had a disastrous close, because mine, I expect, will in the long run be most disastrous; nor for other cause was the name by which you address me given me by one that well knew its signification." Which said, he arose and dismissed them all until supper time. So fair and delightsome was the garden that none saw fit to quit it and seek diversion elsewhere; rather, for the sun now shone with a temper radiance that caused no discomfort, some of the ladies gave chase to the kids and conies and other creatures that haunted it, and scampering to and fro among them as they sat, had caused them 100 times or so some slight embarrassment. Dioneo and Fiammetta fell a singing of Messer Guglielmo and the Lady of Vergio. Filomena and Pamphilo sat them down to a game of chess, and as thus they pursued each their several diversions, time sped so swiftly that the supper hour stole upon them almost unawares, whereupon they ranged the tables round the beautiful fountain, and supped with all glad and festal cheer. When the tables were removed, Philostrato, being minded to follow in the footsteps of his fair predecessors in sway, bade Lauretta lead a dance and sing a song. She answered, "My lord, songs of others know I none, nor does my memory furnish me with any of mine own that seems meet for so gay a company. But if you will be content with what I have, gladly will I give you thereof." "Naught of thine," returned the king, "could be other than goodly and delectable. Wherefore give us even what thou hast." So encouraged, Lauretta, with dulcet voice, but manner somewhat languishing, raised the ensuing strain, to which the other ladies responded:
What dame disconsolate may so lament as I, that vainly sigh, to love still dedicate? He that the heaven and every orb doth move form'd me for his delight, fair, debonair, and gracious, apt for love, that here on earth each soaring spirit might have foretaste how above that beauty shows that standeth in his sight. Ah, but dull wit and slight, for that it judgeth ill, liketh me not, nay, doth me vilely rate. There was who loved me, and my maiden grace did fondly clip and strain, as in his arms, so in his soul's embrace, and from mine eyes love's fire did drink amain, and time that glides apace in nought but courting me to spend was fain, whom courteous I did deign even as my peer to entreat, but am of him bereft. Ah, dolorous fate! Came to me next a gallant swollen with pride, brave in his own conceit, and no less noble eke, whom woe betide that he me took, and holds in all unmeet suspicion jealous-eyed. And I, who wot that me the world should greet as the predestined sweet of many men, well nigh despair to be to one thus subjugate. Ah, woe is me! Cursed be the luckless day when, a new gown to wear, I said the fatal I. For blithe and gay in that plain gown I lived, no whit less fair, while in this rich array a sad and far less honour'd life I bear. Would I had died, or e'er sounded those notes of joy, ah, dolorous cheer, my woe to celebrate! So, list my supplication, lover dear, of whom such joyance I as ne'er another had. Thou that in clear light of the Maker's presence art, deny not pity to thy fear, who thee may ne'er forget, but let one sigh breathe tidings that on high thou burnest still for me, and sue of God that he me there translate.
So ended Lauretta her song, to which all hearkened attentively, though not all interpreted it alike. Some were inclined to give it a moral after the Milanese fashion, to wit, that the good porker was better than pretty Queen. Others construed it in a higher, better, and truer sense, which 'tis not to the present purpose to unfold. Some more songs followed by command of the king, who caused torches not a few to be lighted and ranged about the flowery mead, and so the night was prolonged until the last star that had risen had begun to set. Then, bethinking him that 'twas time for slumber, the king bade all good night, and dismissed them to their several chambers. End of Day 3. The Conclusion.